Okay, we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Palantir Weekly number 40 freaking 2. Absolutely
Stop
crazy.
that fucking bell, dude.
Absolutely
I love the
crazy. I had to do
cowbell,
that for
dude.
Chris.
More
You gotta
cowbell.
love the
Fucking
cowbell.
hate that.
I
Hate
love
that
More
cowbell.
cowbell.
More cowbell.
Here we go, man. We're here. We're with the man, the myth, the legend, Coach Strap. He has blessed us with his honor tonight to be here. Palantir had 3 deals. We're going to be breaking down all of them and talking a little bit more in depth about ontology, which is a video they came out with, and a little bit more deeper about some of the more commoditized things that are happening in the technology space and where the true value actually lies. While we are here, I am here with my Twix cigarette, if we want to call it, for the night, and I'll be I love the it's so cool to hold like a cigar or something, but I don't smoke, so it'd be kind of cool with Twix. So I'm doing that. Coach Rep, what are you indulging yourself with tonight as we talk?
I got this nice bottle of Garrison Brothers that Connor sent me. I'm super stoked. Thank you, Connor. And he also sent me a bottle of Whistle Pig that I drank about, I think it was like 2 weeks ago. We got into that. But I'm excited to try this because it's Texas whiskey, and I don't get Texas whiskey too often, so we'll see how it goes. It's really strong though, so I gotta kind of take it easy.
Okay, we've got Arnie all the way from Italy. Arnie, are you drinking anything? Any coffee? Anything?
I just had my coffee. That is a matter of survivor now.
Yes, because it is pretty early where you were at. Chris, are you drinking anything? Water? What you got?
Yeah, the wife hooked me up with some lemon water.
Oh,
So
Okay.
yeah.
There we go. A mit with his apple juice and Twix. Yes, that's my snack time. All right. So first big news of the day that I want to get into is Palantir's CDC contract, 5 years, $443 million. I thought this was a pretty amazing contract, primarily because the CDC is like, look, we don't want a pandemic to happen again. We need a public health infrastructure to be put in place to make sure we potentially can prevent it from happening. And they didn't choose Snowflake. They didn't choose Datadog. They chose Palantir to do this. So let's start with Coach Drive. What were your thoughts when you heard of this deal? You saw it, anything it reinforced for you, and any new takeaways you got from the company as you saw this deal happen?
What is that? What do they call the biggest healthcare startup you've never heard of, kind of thing?
Oh yeah, did call it that. That's true.
Yeah, no, they're making huge inroads. I don't know what it is about the healthcare space right now, but like they definitely are crushing it. And I'm interested. I mean, it's hard to get information about like what they're building, which maybe we can get some more info about like exactly what they're doing and how they're putting it together. But excited, and I think if they continue this momentum, maybe that industry, it's like, you know how they always say, get a big share of a small market. What if they get a big share of a really big market? So it's like that could be a really big niche for them to build commercial. And so let's see if that momentum keeps moving, and maybe it takes off.
Yeah, HIPAA compliant data sharing has always been a big issue with everyone. Since everyone works, one of the key things that's happening right now is that everyone's transitioning into 1 or 2 EMR systems. So back in the day, there were so many different EMRs. So to try to get all that data and then send it off to like a third party was really difficult. Now with, everyone is almost like either you're an Epic camp or you're Cerner camp, right? So now all the data is in a singular format, and we all use something called HL7 to communicate and everything else. So the standardizing of data and the format is probably the biggest thing. And if Palantir can be the backbone where all that data gets aggregated and then used analytically to figure out, or do surveillance on new types of variants of COVID or any other type of disease, it's definitely a big market. And I think
maybe they're finding ways to leverage that ontology system, because that is the way you can kind of standardize it. I was talking to someone just Friday about this, where if you take your ingest, a lot of the data that they're dealing with comes in these Excel files, but if you mark up the metadata in the Excel files and then use that to map to ontologies, you can actually like then build up this sort of library of standardized objects, and you can pull in from all these crappy sources, and you can like share all that between like a consortium. And Foundry's got some really cool ways they could. So maybe you're right. Maybe that's like the killer use case in there that they're really hammering.
Yeah. Well, they were using it for COVID surveillance, right? That was one of the key like things that really made it popular. So everyone who was almost kind of forced into working with it, because during COVID, when people were gathering data to send it up to their, their state medical departments and everything else, it was still like this weird, like send in Excel data, like and it was simple stuff like how many COVID patients do you have? How many beds do you have? How much supplies do you have? And yet it was so difficult for organizations. So now everything is like at one click. So when you're doing your stuff, it's just like, oh, send the data, boom, done. And we do it right now for like at my hospital system, we do it for some other applications also for like compliance monitoring, where we have an automated system that transmits the data to like a different to a universal body that does accreditations, right? So if you want to be an accredited facility, you have to constantly provide data to third parties who do your accreditation. So basically they're going to say, okay, yeah, this facility operates with a high level of integrity. You know, they have patient safety protocols in place, and these are the numbers that, you know, back it up. So in order for you to do that, you need to have some sort of way to do it easily. And so I think Palantir could probably provide some infrastructure to do that. So I wasn't a big fan of the workflow and like operations part of like Palantir trying to do the hospital stuff, but I think data aggregation is what they were meant to do in healthcare. And if they can help sort that out, it could be potentially a big market that they could. It's all about getting yourself entrenched into some sort of government body. So like right now, the NIH and CDC practically live on Palantir. So now everyone is, and guess what? There's no competitor to NIH. There's no competitor to CDC. So, you know, like, what are you going to do?
If they go about it the way you're talking, they definitely have like a kind of a built-in expansion model, because once you have those ontology objects, it's so much easier to then get into the workflow and get into the actions. And then start, because what's neat about that, as soon as you start doing it, is all the application tools start magnifying the value of all those investments, right? So you can actually start doing cool things where people are taking action and the business is responding in real time. So it's like, if they laid that foundation like you're describing with the data sharing and creating like kind of a universal way to talk about things, the next logical step is taking advantage of those workflows with rules and actions. We'll get into that more later as we
the applications. You don't move back, right? I mean, it's almost impossible to get out.
Yeah. Like I mean, it's not impossible to get out at all. There are migration paths out of Foundry. So if you wanted to get out of that space, you could. The question would be like, would you want to make the investments to realize the same kind of system? And you could migrate a lot of the code out for sure. Like a lot of the data pipelines and ontology mappings, there are ways to kind of migrate that code out. What you're not going to get is the low code, no code dashboards and apps built in Workshop. And you're not going to get all that interconnectivity, because like to get the links between objects, you need a graph database. Well, now I got to build this like graph database on top of this other, you know, on top of my columnar storage system or HDFS system or some other, and then my transactional database. So like as the company, if you're a company, you're like, oh no, I'm going to recreate this in something else. Then you're going to start to realize like how much complexity is going to go into trying to recreate that ontology. It is possible. And you could migrate, but why would you? You know, especially if you're extracting a lot of value. Like I think the thing that is really cool that the reason they don't want to get away from it is like, well, why do you want to give up all that value you're getting right now? And if that's the reason you don't want to get out of it, that's a really good reason. That's like, why do I want to give up the value that I'm extracting right now? Yeah.
Coach Trapp, the CDC stuff that I'm sure you kind of read the press release and got an understanding of, that is a particular use case for Foundry that here's my question. Do you think a Microsoft, an Amazon, or a Snowflake could have competed for that deal? Or do you think that's something uniquely they picked? I know they worked with Palantir in the past, but that's something uniquely they wanted Foundry's ontology to be able to solve for them.
No, I don't know of anything that has an ontology system. I think Microsoft's been busily building the connective tissue for the data. So like, how do you harmonize all this data together? And that's that intelligent data platform, right? So like the IDP platform.
Yep.
And they haven't really gotten to the point yet of like, well, why would I need anything like an ontology? I mean, we do domain driven design, like, is that enough? Or like, and they haven't really figured out what it means to realize the promise of something like domain driven design, where you could actually have things that interact and sort of reflect the real world and behave the way that the real world would. And in order to do that, you got to have all these other things that are in the ontology system, right? And so they haven't gotten there yet. The rest of the world doesn't really know what the ontology is or why they would need it. And if you were to break it down into the features of an ontology, they would get it, I think, pretty quickly. Like the people at Microsoft would understand, like, oh, now I get what they mean by links. Well, links are like graph relationships, right? Everyone knows why that's important, but Palantir kind of talks about it in this ontology wrapping, and they call it object links. You know, so
I think let's transition right into that, because that's probably going to be the main discussion of the night. So this article apparently came out today. that you shared with me. And this is awesome. So this is from Palantir. The senior director of enterprise technology, Marcus Loeffler, I might be saying that wrong, discusses the principles underlying his belief that Palantir's Foundry ontology can transform any enterprise. And they go deep here explaining what the ontology is. Quick little summary of it, and then we'll get into it. He says, I believe there are 3 principles underlying the transformative power of the ontology. Number 1, data analytics and models created by technology are meaningless without connectivity to real-world action, data-driven decision-making. 2, organizations must embrace complexity to survive. This is basically what Karp has been spewing for the past couple months. And 3, technology should empower businesses to understand, achieve, and sustain optimum complexity as simple as possible. That right there seems like a very strong core investment thesis, at least for the technology of the ontology. So if we could start from the beginning, we keep hearing this word. What in layman's terms is the ontology that Palantir keeps talking about? And then we'll get into sort of why it can change an enterprise.
Didn't you define ontology a few podcasts ago?
I did, but I defined it philosophically because I did debate in high school. And the first thing we learn is like Kantianism, right? And so the ontology is like the state of being. So, that's, in November 2021, when I was hearing Palantir talk about ontology, I was like, wait a second, this, like Immanuel Kant talks about ontology. Why are you guys like that's what I was like, what the fuck are these guys? And then I was like, oh, they're talking about like the state of being of the enterprise. And what does it mean for there to be like an understanding of an organization? So it's an interesting philosophical term, but also a technical term as well.
So maybe the question here I would be, we know that the ontology is related to the digital twin. My question, I think many people have is the ontology a digital twin, or is the argumentation of a digital twin?
So it's definitely a digital twin in the sense that I want to be able to first just think about what the digital twin is useful for, and it's really simulations, right? So like you want to know what will happen, you want to be predictive, not reactive, right? So like that's why the digital twins are super useful, and why people are trying to do digital transformation is it puts you in a position where you're not constantly reacting to things, and as you're reacting, the state of the world is like completely drifted from where you were yesterday looking at your dashboard. The goal with the ontology is to sort of simulate what's going to happen in the real world when an event occurs, or when data, like the things that are going to stimulate the system actually happen, right?
And Coach Rob, when you mean simulate, you mean literally predict if X happens, Y and Z will happen before that happens.
Before it happens. A good example of that are the simulations that the Ferrari runs, right? Like they're gonna run simulations on different builds of their vehicles to figure out which one's gonna work better, with some degree of accuracy. Because you don't want to go build the fucking thing and then have it like not work. You're not gonna go build 4 versions of it. You want to be able to build the version that's gonna perform the best ahead of time. But there are other things like anomaly detection where you want to make sure you're doing preventative maintenance, on things. And then what's the cost if I do the preventative maintenance? What happens downstream, right? So if you can predict all those things ahead of time, you're in a really, really good position. You can be ultra cost effective. So like what the ontology allows you to do is to model the things that let you do that, which include the linkages between things. So like what type of links are there between these objects? What are the behaviors of the objects? What do they do, right? What can they do? What can they interoperate with? What kind of state can they affect? Can they affect the state of the real world? All of that can be like packaged into ontology actions. So they have this behavioral aspect to them. The other thing that's really cool about ontologies is now they have rules. And so like there's this engine called rules that lets you essentially alert and take actions based on the state of the ontology. So it's constantly evaluating the state of the ontology, or it's not constantly evaluating, but during as part of a batch process, evaluating the state of the ontology, and it can take some action based on something. And that's also like a really cool feature of if you think about it, that's a lot of how a business behaves, right? Like when an event occurs, something else happens, right? Mm-hmm. Some person takes an action. And you can do that. You can simulate, you can define those things in these rules engines. And that's that part where they're talking about like process flow later in that article. So they're talking about how do you define like a process flow and how do you make these things connect? And so you can use the rules engine to do that. And then the other thing is the write back capabilities, because what if I want to affect the real world, right? Like what if I want to affect things outside of Foundry? The write back capabilities allow you to essentially embed those behaviors so that it can affect, whether it's a wind farm or whether it's your rig. It can actually make changes in the real world by affecting through write back all of those external systems, right? So then your system actually kind of behaves like the things in the real world, right?
Right.
And that's why it's super. But you need all of those capabilities. Like you can't have just one of those capabilities. And this is kind of an old concept. Like if people have been around a while, we're familiar with domain-driven design, which is a similar kind of thing where you create domain objects around different parts of the real world business you're in, right? And those things have people in the Java world have been kind of building applications in a somewhat kind of similar way, but they were missing a lot of these other components that were in there, like graph relationships, for example. You would have to build a separate graph database to be able to model those things, and that wasn't very popular. So you can never really see the relationships between things, and you can never be predictive about like what paths things tend to take in an organization. And that's where like graph databases are really useful in recommendation engines. But there's a lot of things that you can learn through graph theory about your business, about the way things interoperate. And so like that would be something that was missing from traditional domain-driven design. Workflows, there was a lot of investment in building business process automation back in the day, but it was never part of the core domains, really. This was like a layer on top, whereas the ontology makes it so a lot of that stuff that might have been business process automation is part of the connective tissue of the ontology. So it's really kind of what I would call a novel way to look at domain-driven design and build these domains that represent the real world in such a way that it actually emulates what's going to happen. So there's a lot of pieces in there. And the other thing about the ontology too is it's not just data, right? It's also models. So like ontologies also contain these machine learning models. You can actually treat those as first-class citizens, and they can participate in a lot of the response to information, right? So like there's an event, but the models can be used to like surface signals, and they can also be used to sort of process the signals, which is really cool. So if you think about how anomaly detection works and how you would build machine learning models for preventative maintenance, you can see how that would be really valuable to have a system that can make models a first-class citizen in all of that, right? So now your system's intelligent. So it's all of those things together. No one has really figured that out, to my knowledge, except for Palantir. And they keep innovating. Like rules is pretty new to my understanding. That came out of this project called Taurus. And that was part of this collaboration they did with BP. And BP used Taurus to make citizen sort of anomaly detection modeling capable, like be able to happen. So like you're an average person at BP, you can now build an anomaly detection system on top of the ontology with Taurus, or it's called rules now, that lets you do things like predict when maintenance needs to happen, right? So it's like that kind of stuff is pretty incredible. Before it needs maintenance. Before it needs to happen. But like the fact that they were able, like that's really new. I think the final version of it came out in July of 2022. I don't have an exact date. I'm trying to get that from the team. But so they're continually adding to the ontology. So it's not just a static thing. They're continually kind of working with customers to figure out like these features, these new products that people have discovered in ways to make these things work that can be boxed and offered to other people. So it is continuing to evolve as well. So even if people tried to catch them today on like, oh, maybe I could build an ontology system which emulate every feature, well, they might be like 10 more steps ahead by the time you get that out the door. So good luck.
But, sorry to jump in, Kostrop. I heard many other companies, like also AWS, talking about the digital twin. So what's the difference? Because from my understanding, and here correct me if I'm wrong, it's like the digital twin is like a simulation engine, while the ontology seems like that uses the digital twin, but is something more that is strictly connected to the operations, while the digital twin seems more like I just test scenarios. I'm right?
Well, a lot of companies, when they talk about a digital twin of their organization, unfortunately, it winds up being some kind of like a data representation of the business. So they'll basically say, "Oh, I'm going to make this digital twin, and it's going to wind up being a dashboard of all these things, and that's my digital twin." Or it's this data representation of what is happening in quote real time, right? Like that's not a digital twin. Like what happens if the operator over here sneezes on this equipment and it goes down? Can you answer that question? Do you know or no? Usually that's a question they have to ask the humans on the other end. Like, hey, Bob, what happens if you spill your freaking coffee all over this thing and this machine goes down? Bob can tell you, because he's probably done it 10 times before, that it is going to screw up the assembly line for however long. It'll take like 20 minutes to repair or whatever. But what's unique with Palantir is you can actually encode that as in these through the actions and through the models to show you what will happen downstream, right? And because it can take advantage of links to understand what the downstream effects are, do that. So imagine it's almost like, think of the ontology as like a bunch of dominoes, right? You got all these dominoes. You want to know what happened if you push this domino, right? But the ontology provides all of the behavioral modeling along with all of the data information and all of the predictive like AI and ML required to simulate that, so you don't have to do it. You know, so you can see what dominoes are going to fall depending on which ones you push down. And for most people, digital twin, they don't think of that. They don't think that they have to actually create representations that include behavior, not just state, but also incorporate ML, so that you can model complex and sophisticated things, not just heuristics, right? So like in programming, most of what we write are heuristics. They're not perfect representations. They're sort of good enough. And a lot of the ones we use that you typically are going to codify in like a business process are really bad. And being able to bring artificial intelligence in there makes the system like 10 times better. So like if you think of the ontology, think of it as like it's a bunch of features that let you do that domino simulation. And they've combined them in a really novel way under an orchestration engine that makes that possible and not overly complicated. So that whole quote about like embrace complexity, right? Like a lot of people would run away from something that complex. There's that famous quote by Rich Hickey, which basically, you know, says if you're building complex systems, you're going to fail. You know, like the person that builds the least complex thing is going to win, right? And it's a principle of software engineering. Like we're constantly trying to drive complexity down. And Palantir on some level saying, no, what you're trying to do with digital transformation is complicated by nature, right? You're trying to emulate the real world. And it requires you be able to do things like encode the behaviors of a system and to use artificial intelligence to do it and to provide the links between all those things. So, you know, when this thing behaves this way, this thing over here behaves this way, right? That's a really complicated thing, but it's the minimum complexity required to get a good answer, which is also the really novel and unique thing they're saying in there, which is that they feel they found a way to do it right and to basically make that system like a series of Lego bricks that you can put together rather than building this giant monolithic thing that like is really hard to maintain and brittle. And that's generally what they mean when they say like, oh, let's get the simplest version of this, which is like make the most modular, flexible version of that thing that you can. So it's not rigid and will bend and not break, right? So that's in terms of like software engineering, that's how we think about those things.
I have a question on the AI portion of that. So you say when you put AI on top of the ontology, that like hypercharges its effective and efficiency because it's based on these models. So is this where we get into the network effect of Palantir, where it's like, let's say they're working with T-Mobile and they're hypothetically stimulating 10,000 different events from supply chains to logistics to accounting to sales to marketing to come up with a real ontological explanation of T-Mobile's business, hypercharged by these models that are now learning based off all T-Mobile's data. When they go to work with Pepsi next, is that ontology that was or those models that were trained on T-Mobile's ontology, do those get applied to make Pepsi's simulations 10 times better now because they're trained on these models?
Could like a better, like give a better example, like let's just say I'm BP and I'm making an anomaly detection model and I want to run it against this I don't know, this machine over here that runs at a certain rate. And I want to know when the bearings inside it are going to break, you know. And you can build a model in Foundry, deploy it as part of your ontology, and then feed into it the data that's coming into the ontology system and let it trigger some kind of an event or some kind of an action. So the data will come in, the model will give it a score, and based on that, you can take an action downstream against another object, right? Or write back to some other system in addition to that.
Right.
Now, that anomaly detection model might be really useful outside of BP, right? That anomaly detection model for knowing when bearings will break might be useful to Toyota, you know? Yeah. There's huge applications for that. Yeah. And like, if it's built on the Foundry ontology, even better, if it's built as an archetype, you can just ship that in as an archetype and hit the install button in Foundry and it'll install that model for you. And then you're off and running. You just are plugging it into your ontology at that point.
Did you see that one, CodeStrap CPM, the one that they had for Cars Auto specifically? Because they actually did a video on. Let me pull up the video. I'll show you guys. Because it was
the Hyper
really
Auto
cool.
one. I didn't see the predictive maintenance one though.
Yeah, let me show you.
Yeah.
I mean, what I would like to ask you, CodeStrap, but how would it work in terms of ownership of the archetype? Because if you said BP developed something, isn't BP the owner of the archetype?
Well, yeah, but I mean, BP can distribute it under whatever terms it wants to, provided there's a distribution mechanism and a way to uphold the terms, you know. So a good example of that would be like a lot of code that isn't open source, or it is open source and offered under a license agreement. Like if you go to GitHub and you go to every GitHub repo, there's a license agreement in all of those. And the license agreement all has terms and conditions that's in it. Now, the problem with GitHub is people can violate those terms and conditions, right? Like I could take that code, I could never credit you, I could use it whatever way I want to. But with Palantir, if you're distributing an archetype, the rules and conditions can actually be embedded into the platform, right? And if you want to say pay people for a number of inferences done, Foundry is guaranteed to uphold that, right? Now, that capability doesn't exist today. It's not in the platform, to my knowledge. But it certainly wouldn't be a stretch to think that they could do that, like
so sort of marketplace.
Yeah,
going forward.
Yeah, and it would work the same with like the data pipelines that feed the model, right? So like an archetype isn't just the model. The archetype can be the data pipeline that produces the training data and the test data, right? So like it can include all of the nuances of that, and all you got to do is like hook up your source data, and then out the other end will come this ontology model object that then you can drop in to your rules or into your analysis and workshop or Quiver or wherever. So that becomes like, if you think about the network effects, yeah, like if they get a marketplace together and there's thousands of people using this thing, the network effects are going to be incredible. But it just depends on, do those companies want to exchange that stuff? Is it worth it to them? But as an ROI, as a benefit to ROI, you would think so.
Okay, this is Skywise for cars.
Automotive suppliers must constantly monitor product performance and resolve quality issues quickly to ensure they don't face costly claims. For quality analysts and engineers, this involves a long manual process of analyzing claims and failed parts that lack vital information, including live vehicle data such as diagnostic trouble codes. Identifying root cause issues is complex, issue resolution is slow, and costs quickly escalate. The Component Performance Monitor, or CPM from Palantir, enables suppliers like yourselves to better manage your quality risk and significantly reduce the costs incurred from faulty parts by leveraging near live vehicle data, empowering your quality experts to identify failure patterns and root cause quality issues in real time, monitor the effectiveness of remediation measures in the fleet using live vehicle data, and proactively request faulty parts for further analysis, all in a single collaborative interface that supercharges the supplier to OEM feedback cycle, leading to faster proactive issue resolution, a reduction in claims, and better customer experiences.
Yeah, it's really cool. And what's neat about that too is like the models aren't static. Like that whole evaluate the effectiveness of the remediation strategy or whatever. Like what's neat about that is like in machine learning, you're typically creating feedback loops so that you can continually improve the model. And part of what you need from the feedback loop is information about the remediation or the false positives or like where things can, like how is this thing fixed, And so like what's neat about Foundry is that there's absolutely ways to set up like these feedback loops so you can continually retrain these models and they get spit back out, So it's not a static type solution where the operations isn't built in. So under that scenario that I was talking about where you install the anomaly detection model from BP for the bearings in this machine to see when they might fail. It's not a static model. Once you have that pipeline, it's continually learning off your data stream, right? So it's going to adapt. And because if you, like, for example, they have ML objectives in Foundry, and ML objectives are like the operations side. And you can see, like, you could even do multiple versions. Like once you have the archetype installed, you could do multiple versions with different hyperparameters and set for your model and see which one does better with ML objectives and just collapse to that version. So it includes all of the operational aspects to deploy and manage and see the results of the model. So like a lot of people don't realize that, like in Foundry, like it's not just the models you can create and use in the ontologies as part of that alerting and action system, but it's the feedback loop to operationalize all of it so that your models aren't static. Because in machine learning, like one of the things is you get model drift and eventually that model will degrade and break down. Like, so, because the real world changes all the time. The effects of the data can change. The different types of data coming in can change, like the data itself, like the values and the parameters. And so you get degradation in your models really quickly. And if you don't have a feedback loop to operationalize that, the whole value of that system would fall apart, And so Foundry is absolutely through ML objectives operationalized from start to finish. There's also Foundry ML, which is, for the stuff that I'm doing, I'm using Foundry ML more in code authoring. But model objectives are really good at the operational feedback loop.
But so is this feedback loop a very difficult thing to actually build?
Shit, yeah, dude. Like we have a team of ML infrastructure at my work that is just engineers that build that, and they're not cheap, and there's a lot of them. So yeah, it's hard, and it's really easy to get wrong. Like so a lot of times when they build those feedback loops, they're just crappy. Like they break all the time, you know, and like the training pipelines break consistently. That you're responding too late to like problems in production, and everything's screwed up at that point. You know, there are a lot of times, even in the feedback loops themselves, people will forget to like build a proper audit trail, so you know what version of the model was producing that inference, you know, and what data was
Jesus.
trained on, and who signed off on it.
Did you see the size of that water bottle? Just
Bro, I knew you were
No,
gonna
I
say
didn't.
something
I didn't
about it,
see
bro.
it.
Dude,
I was looking at Arnie.
look at that thing, dude.
It's not even that serious,
Let
bro.
me see.
I knew you were
No,
gonna say something.
show him. Look at the size of this thing.
Oh,
I gotta
yeah.
get my water in, bro.
No,
I gotta
I'm
get
the
some
same way,
water.
man. I'm probably gonna buy one because I have one that's like smaller than that, and like I want to buy one like that because I'm constantly refilling that thing.
Bro, that
You
looks
know-
like it could
Bro,
could quench the thirst of like 100 villagers in Africa, bro.
Bro, you know the reason I actually got this? I'm gonna show you guys right now. I have
This
this
is
crappy
good.
mic stand, and I use it as a paperweight basically to hold down.
That's
stand.
funny, dude.
Like
Oh
I
my God.
literally, if I don't do this, the mic like that's how I use it. That's the fun.
Classic.
But anyway,
Damn, sorry about that.
no
I just had to
worries.
say
and you
something
totally
about
ruined
that,
a
bro.
great discussion on ontology and feedback loop. So
Yeah.
here's the question, Coach Strap: if you had a certain amount of capital, would you allocate it to a lake house for data, or something that's doing this ontology hard stuff that 17,000 ML engineers can't figure out at your job? Like, is that the investment thesis around Palantir?
I didn't say they
is
didn't figure it out at my job. I just said there are
It's a
places
difficult
where they
thing.
didn't figure. No, my work there, they're pretty awesome. So we got top quality people, top notch people. But I've been at other places where that's been a real
where it's hard,
challenge.
right?
Yeah.
Is the ontology thing a big part of the thesis for like thinking Palantir?
It's a huge part of the thesis. And you know what's interesting is I really thought I understood it like, you know, a few months ago, and then I didn't really understand the parts about models being first class citizens, and I didn't understand rules, and so like that and how that affects workflows and how it plays into the simulation engine. So like it's definitely like a really hard thing to wrap your arms around to understand it, but it's such a differentiator. And like once you realize that that's the central piece of everything, and if you realize like everything, that all the problems that you're trying to solve in your business stem from some problem you need to solve in this ontology layer. So if you solve the ontology layer, you solve the entire category of problems in your business that relate to it, right? And so yes, it's a massive differentiator. Once you figure that out, once you solve the ontology piece, everything else downstream just becomes value add, like or value creation, like immediate value creation. You just solved all of these problems, and then you can start actually moving on to doing something about it. And so, yeah, it's a huge, huge differentiator. And again, most of the reason a lot of these other digital transformations fails because they don't find a way to be predictive. It's always reactive, and they don't find a way to actually model how things behave in their business.
That thing matters. Prediction versus reaction.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like,
that's the big difference. That's what everyone's trying to get to. Like the whole thing about digital transformation is to operate like FANG companies, to make data-driven decisions. But you can't make data-driven decisions about the fucking past. You know, it's like you really want to make it about like what is going to happen, not what did happen.
And when you say operate like FANG companies, the example that comes to my mind is like you search for products on Amazon, so Amazon can predict the next thing to show you to buy. And if that could be implemented metaphorically in millions of other organizations, that could increase their efficiency and efficacy ultimately as a company.
Yeah, it's like also like predict the effect of this new product feature on conversion rates,
right?
Or predict the lifetime customer value of this person here, so that we can go out and capture, go out and get that person into
predict a terrorist attack that might happen.
Yeah. The data. A lot of times people think data-driven decision is like almost like you're back testing a model or something. They think it's like, oh, I want to go back and get insights about the past. No, motherfucker, you want to get insights about the future. It's like that's the challenge, and you can only do that if you have this ability to define the links between things. How do they relate? What are the relationship types between the objects? How do they behave? What are the things this thing can do? Not only what the state, and then of course you have to have the state attributes of the thing at that moment in time, right? And then again, what are the business processes that take place as a result of a change, right? So it's like all these things have to be modeled in there, and you need to be very flexible in that system. If you try to do that in a really rigid way, you can't keep up with the pace of change. they have to be decoupled, and you have to be able to build each of those things independently of one another, and they just need to work together, you know, at the end of the day. If you try to define it all as like one big monolithic thing, it'll be way too rigid and break, and it'll be way too complicated. But if you can get small little independent things that all define these things individually, and then you have this platform that lets you connect them together, then you have a really modular, flexible system, and it can actually work, right? And it's predictive at the end of the day, right?
Sorry,
so you're bringing,
yep. When we speak about the ontology, we generally think of the entire company under the same pane of glass. But can we say that the ontology is actually composed into each single module? Because I guess that when you start using a Foundry with modules, some layers of the ontologies are already there. And then gradually, the more you expand, the better the picture of your entire operations. So is it true that to have the ontology, basically you just need to use Foundry, and the more things you put it into, the better the picture?
Sort of. I think it's how do I describe it? It's like it's easier to show you these things. I wish I could open Foundry and just like walk you through a bunch of ontology objects and creating them, and then like how do you define the links, and then how do you define the actions, and like how do you incorporate a model in there. And that's easier to explain. I'm trying to do like the ducks and bunnies version, but like think of it as like in the real world, all of these companies are made up of a lot of different modular parts, right? Like so like there's all the modular parts that make up your factory line, you know. Then there's all the people that operate those things. Then there's the larger organizational structure that that holds them. It could be a building, and it could have people in it, and all. It's like in the real world, things are absolutely composed. Complexity emerges from composition, right? It's not an inherent property, right? And so what's cool about the ontology is it lets you define all those individual things and then link them together, so you can like do a really good job of defining this one thing and how it behaves, and then you can connect it with other things. And so the complexity in the system emerges, but it's like what they were talking about, the minimum complexity required to define, like to emulate a complex system, you know? And so you can, the value creation that comes out of that, absolutely, the more things you connect together, the more things you model and build in the ontology, the more powerful that system becomes, the more questions it can answer, the more people it can affect, like the more things in the real world it can affect. And the better the predictive algorithms become. Because the thing about yep.
So I was going to think.
Well, let me close on this one thing. It's kind of like the butterfly effect, right? Like where, like if we're talking about chaos theory and sort of like how these complex systems behave in thermodynamics, it's like there's this ability for really small changes or initial conditions. Let's just focus on initial conditions. Like the initial conditions really, really, really matter. You need to know the initial conditions like really, really well. And that includes like being able to define all the things that make up the system if you want to predict anything about a complex system, right? And the ontology allows you to go in and individually model all those individual things to get those initial conditions right. And so when you push the domino, you know, you can do a really good job of predicting about how all these things will behave, but you don't do it by trying to define all of the interactions of the whole thing together. It's like when you build a model of like a thermodynamic model, you're trying to define how the individual molecules behave, right? Mm-hmm. And so like the ontology lets you kind of define all the individual behaviors of the smallest building blocks of your organization and then put them together. And then you can have a really good picture of how things will actually behave, because as it turns out, you can't really do that. You can't holistically define that. You can't really holistically define how a complex system behaves with any kind of accuracy. You have to define how all the individual parts behave, put them together into kind of like a simulation engine, and then see how they react. And that's really what the ontology is letting you do. It's letting you define all those things. So the value of the predictions and the value you can deliver is definitely dependent on how many of those things you define, how well you do at defining them, and then how well you do it like actually connecting them together to see the effects. But it's an iterative process. You can like, because they have the simulation engine, you can go in there and see how well your model is like back testing against reality. For example, you could run data through it that you already know the answer to, and you can see how it behaves, and you can iterate that way, which is really cool.
So here's a question. We always talk about the positives. We always go into like it can do this, it can do that, it can do this. What are some of the limitations that you think that need to be overcome for this to actually go mainstream? Because I hear a lot of things. One of the issues that's definitely a question mark that's on a lot of people's brain is scalability, right? How scalable is this in terms of like an operating, like, you know, being able to be integrated into a system without the need for multiple, you know, multiple people from Palantir to do it? Like, is this something that you can plug and play and be running in a very short period of time?
So it's a really good question, and I think there's definitely a lot of answers to it because it depends on how complex your organization is. You know, there's when you get into these larger orgs, there's so much complexity in how these systems, like how their data is defined, you know, and like where it's kept. You might have 20 years of evolution of that organization, maybe 40, 50 years of evolution of that organization. And you still have systems in there that were from like 1984. That's like there, and that is a massive challenge. And when you talk about trying to bring, getting your arms around that, and then figuring out all of the nuances and Foundry that are there, maybe that's not something you could do on your own. You know, I don't have the answer to that. And I think that a lot of companies who are successful leverage Palantir directly to help them when they're in those situations of enormous organizational complexity, enormous you know, challenges related to tons of systems that all have to be connected together. And this is a high failure rate problem generally, by the way, that the 80% failure rate in digital transformation, or 70%, depending on who you're talking to, a lot of it relates to that. Your organization is just complicated. You know, and you got to kind of embrace that. You know, there's no silver bullet here. There's no free lunch. So on some level, that is a Chris, what I want to say is, on some level, when I'm saying there's no free lunch, that's not a problem anyone can solve. That's not a problem Microsoft can solve. It's not a problem fucking Snowflake sure shit can't solve. Like no one can solve that problem.
That's true.
And so you have to embrace that on some level. The flip side of that is that if I'm greenfield, or if I'm a startup, or I'm day zero, or even if I'm not, even if I'm just dealing with a normal mid-sized business that is, you know, not dealing in 50,000 different databases, like it's really easy for your people to go in day zero and build value. And I, like, for example, one of my new project that I'm building, Pipeline Builder, in the ontology system, is this anomaly detection for Google Analytics data. And so, like, if I'm just a normal sized company and I want to know more about my Google Analytics data, and I want to be alerted when there's something interesting for me to look at, super easy to go in. No help from Palantir at all. You know, anything you're building in AWS, like you probably aren't going to need help with it if you're a mid-sized business, or GCP or Azure. I think it's where you run into problems, or like the literal Frankenstein monster complex org that's got 4 different ERPs and fucking who knows how many other redundant systems. The data's all fucked up. You know, it's like that. Those are the people that need help. And no one can solve that problem.
See, if it was me trying to implement a go-to-market strategy for this specific thing, what I would do is, there are key people within Palantir who have been there for a really long time. They have this energy and this drive to do more, right? The problem is they have a very, from what I'm hearing, okay, they have a very like flat hierarchy. So what happens is, a lot of times they have a problem retaining the talent, because if you don't have that upward momentum, what's going to happen? Well, the talent tends to go out and do other things. Well, my thing would be, why aren't you investing in those people? Give them some money, do some VC funding, right? I would say Palantir Ventures, throw some money behind your former employees who know what the hell, you know, they're doing, and then let them go wild, let them build products and sell it. And guess what? You reap the benefits of them becoming 5, 50, 30, like 50x, right?
You know, Google went through the same thing. You know, Google, when they built AdSense, Kim Scott wrote a really good book about this called Radical Candor. That's not what the book is about, but she talks about that time during Google, and a lot of people left to create their own startups. They were ultra successful. We all know who they are. So like, and that was right about the time people were saying Google had stopped innovating, which is kind of weird because some former Palantir employees have accused Palantir of the same thing. And Google restructured itself into a holding company in response to that.
Yeah.
And we've all talked about like splitting commercial and government. I think that's the wrong discussion. I think it's really about like forming a holding company, splitting up the commercial and government entities. But how do you then continue to innovate as a holding company and doing what you're talking about, which is empower those former employees, buy up the Andurils of the world, start really creating verticals in this space, especially with government, because government software and robotics and AI is like, this is going to be innovated for the next 100 years, like, or more. Like the shit that's going to happen is going to, like, you guys have no idea, because in the government space, they can proceed without any rules or regulation that's going to affect the private sector, you know? And if Palantir structures itself to be the Google of government and commercial, and also have their commercial arm, like they're gonna absolutely destroy it. But you're right, they do need to do that. And it's something that Google had to go through. A lot of successful tech companies have to do that.
See, that's what shocks me. When I looked at Anduril, I thought that at least to some degree, Palantir would have thrown some money behind them very early in their,
you would think,
their
right?
development.
I would have thought,
considering half of, if you look at Anduril's engineers, right? First of all, their CEO is former Palantir, who was actually instrumental in building a lot of great things. So it's kind of crazy. Like, why didn't you guys put some money behind your guy, man? Like, you know the value that this guy.
I know the employees did. Like, they created they have a VC. You know, the former employees created like a Palantir alum VC thing.
Yeah.
There are former Palantirians or hobbits or whatever you want to call them that have created stuff like that. But you're right in that Google was very smart in how they decided to restructure for innovation. And it is that classic innovator's dilemma where you know the only way you're going to get out of it is to acquire and grow that way. I think Palantir isn't quite there yet, but given how old they are as an organization, maybe some of the same problems kind of seep in. But you know, to me, I think that you're right about the scalability problem, in the sense that no one can solve that for a large organization. And I think you're right in terms of the way that maybe they spark the innovation and growth is through this ability to acquire and to like pick up their own employees who can then build value. And what's interesting is, like, there are things that I want to build and that I know probably some of their former employees are building that could have a direct impact in Foundry, or you could actually build, like, take those apps and incorporate Foundry into them. So a good example of that would be like, hey, are you solving a real-time messaging scaling of data at the edge, like, so you could have scaled toward like really massive databases at the edge that leverage memory and let you connect to apps, you know, and like use that as your in-memory data store for all your apps. Why is that powerful? Because then you could have like basically a transaction funnel that eventually gets into Foundry, and Foundry would process all your transactions and do all your data analytics, but you could have massive horizontal scale at the edge. Like, those are kind of things that former Palantirians can build and they could invest in and buy, that then benefit their core Foundry product, you know? So it's like, there's a lot of things they could do that would spark innovation and help them scale if they took that approach. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, one of them is weird. It's Hex. Hex was actually a former Palantir engineer, but Snowflake Ventures.
I was on that podcast where you asked him that question, dude. That was really cool.
Yeah, it was like, so it's to me, it's crazy that you have other venture capitalists, especially when your founders have their own venture capital arms, right?
Yeah, because Teal has funded Anduril. Founders Fund has, even if Palantir hasn't.
Exactly. But that's the thing. Palantir right now has a ton of cash on their balance sheet, right?
Yeah,
they're not doing anything with it. So
but a lot of startups fail. I mean, do you think it would be the best idea?
But think about it. You get an insight into your former employee. You know the technology, you know the energy, the drive that person has. And if they're going to leave anyway because they want to do more and they want to do better, and you can't find a place for them in the company to give them the ability to run wild, dude, putting some money behind them could really here's an example. Oracle, right? Oracle had a lot of the founders from Snowflake were actually former Oracle employees who tried to do what they were doing. Well, guess what? They didn't get nearly the amount of support that they should have. They went out and they founded their own company, which is like a multi-billion-dollar company. Now, here's the thing. If you would have let them run in your org, you could have generated that value. But let's say they still wanted to leave. They wanted to be entrepreneurs. They had that entrepreneurial drive. Guess what? You could have invested a little bit of money into them, and they would have been huge for you later in the future. My thing is, a lot of these personalities that I've seen in Palantir, their employees, they have like this alpha personality where they're like the smartest people in the room. Everyone says that. They have a history of hiring some of the best engineers.
They're all really smart, but they don't have an alpha personality. I mean, not all of them. Some of them do. Nah, I met quite a few of them. I think they're all just So my mom worked at the NSA, and she said that she would meet people at the NSA. You couldn't even, like, they're so fucking smart, you couldn't even talk to them. That's how smart they were, you know, like. And my mom she's smart, dude. Like this lady's ultra smart. She's a mathematician, and she would go there and just feel super intimidated, but you couldn't really, and like they would just look at you, like she would say, "Oh, these people are so smart." They just look at you and they're almost like staring past you, and they're thinking about things, and it's really hard to have a conversation.
So you're saying
they have a lot of that kind of. They have engineers that are really, but then they have engineers who are really smart, but also product owners. Like they can run a team, run a product, run a small org, and interact with clients. You know, so there are a lot of different personalities in that group, but they are all really smart. I've gotten feedback from customers though that the interaction isn't positive in a lot of cases. You know, and I don't want to call it arrogance, but I think that they don't speak the same language as the customer in a lot of cases, and that causes friction. It's kind of like what I was talking about, where my mom would try to have a conversation with this person who's like the next Einstein. And you just can't do it, you know, because you're not at.
So you're saying if I take out my phone to add 11 plus 9, they would not be impressed. these like, arrogant pricks would not be happy with me adding 11 plus 9.
It would just be like if you're using terms that they don't understand, because in their mind, like that's just too dumb, and they're using terms that you don't understand because they're too smart. Then you don't communicate. You're just talking past each other, you know. Yeah. And I think that maybe there's some of that going on, but the conversations I've had with different customers, multiple customers at this point, I think it's mostly centers around that. And that is hard when you have, maybe you only, okay, so like the engineer who's really smart that can also talk to a customer and run a team and do all, like one of those for every 100, you know, and like, so you can't get that person in front of every customer probably. Yeah. But they have amazing people and they're all brilliant. I think it's just like the communication at the business level is where things might be break down, you know.
Yeah, I see it at work too. Like I have people, like I'm not the smartest guy in the office by no means, but I have that ability to react to people and to be like talk to them on a human level. That like some of some of the people that work in hardcore engineering, they know way more than I do. But guess what? When they talk, they literally are describing something and the other person's just completely lost. So they come to me and say, "Hey, can you ask your friend to do this for me?" And I'm like, "Okay, no problem." And so sometimes you need like that go-between. And that's what I guess the salespeople do, right? And some of the product people who are on site where they're managing the team, but they may not be technically savvy. They may just be like, "Hey, I'm here to translate what the engineers are doing for you." You know,
it's hard because like the typical role for that is like a solutions architect at AWS, for example. And they'll come into the room when the salespeople have got a deal on the table, and they'll look at the deal and they'll try to architect the solution with the customer, answer the customer's questions, help the salesperson quantify that in terms of like what is the lift for us, what are we going to charge, what are the deal points, contract terms, you know, all that kind of stuff. But the issue is that those people have maybe a few years of technology experience. They're not super technical, you know, and they're building templatized solutions for AWS. So it's like you kind of have a playbook that you go to and you read from the playbook. Remember we were talking earlier about no one can solve that problem for you, the massive complexity problem. You can't take an AWS solution and architect and put them to go try and solve, you know, the digital twin problem or the digital transformation problem of, you know, some mass like a BP. That's not going to work. Or Tyson Foods. Like, did you see the people they brought into Tyson Foods?
Yeah.
Akshay was leading that team. Akshay is fucking incredible, you know?
Yeah.
So like, but like, dude, like, you know, like you only have one of him, you know, and you got, and if you want to scale to thousands of customers, they're all going to have that one problem. They're going to have that problem. And so maybe the challenge for them is like, we have these impossible challenges of digital transformation that we want to do. Well, maybe you scale the other way. Maybe you start looking at like the smaller mid-market companies and you just hand them Foundry and a mass market solution. And maybe that helps boost your growth while you focus all of your Akshays on the Tyson Foods of the world, you know? So like they need to get smarter, in my opinion, about being able to say no to customers they shouldn't work with, because there are a lot of customers you just shouldn't work with, especially if you know that they have an impossible problem and you can't put Akshay on it, don't fucking do it. You know, it's like, I think that's number one, because it's going to ruin your reputation. People are going to get very angry very fast. The other is to figure out how do we then scale revenue when we're saying no to multi-million-dollar deals that we know we can't succeed in? We'll fucking scale the mid-market, you know, make it a mass market product. shit, by the analysis I was doing with someone the other day, we were guessing that most of Salesforce revenue, 80% of Salesforce revenue is probably coming from mid-market companies.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
So why not? You know?
Yeah.
So I would think that they should start thinking about things like that, where they can use the mass market strategy to say no to customers that are going to fail, and they know they're going to fail, and focus in on the ones that they really want to work with, and bring their A game, and make sure that the people in the room speak business and not just technology, you know, and aren't just amazing engineers. They're also amazing representatives, in my opinion.
Yeah, choosing counterparties is very important. Like
Huge.
some of their biggest blowups, like their failures, have been like ones that you would have thought they would have been able to knock out the park and would have been huge revenue generators. So here's an example: Credit Suisse. They actually created a joint product. They did a joint venture with Credit Suisse to identify rogue trading patterns among their traders, so that this way they can monitor that and stamp out bad actors. But what ended up happening was somehow the upper management kind of played around and turned it into an internal spying thing, where literally people were being followed, and data from your traders was personal information was being gathered. And it was the same thing at JP Morgan. So JP Morgan had originally had a huge contract with them, but then they found out that someone from their security division was actually spying on senior executives at JP Morgan. And then they told him, get the hell out,
Wow.
So it was like some of the stuff that you read about in the background that, kind of happened with Palantir. Just it's one of those things.
I've heard bad stories too.
Yeah.
I've heard a few bad stories now from different companies. And
yeah.
They had a product that came out 7 or 8 years ago. Karps talked about it. Remember when he would say we had that first product and it failed, but he never digs into exactly what that is. I mean, I know why he doesn't. Why would you want to air your dirty laundry to the whole world? But they're still they are still dealing with the ramifications of that failure among very large companies who were part of that. And what kind of bummed me out about that is that if I would never bring a product to market that way. That's just not in the cards. When I'm building a SaaS platform, that is not how we build it. And I have been at companies where it is where you're essentially taking a solutions engagement and trying to turn that into a product, and you're over committing, and your things that you think are baked aren't fully baked. You're kind of doing best case estimation, and you're seeing with that Daniel Kahneman phenomenon, where you're basically always best case everything, and you're never thinking about realistically about what your strike rate is, or what your past history has been. And so I think that maybe they got themselves into some trouble with that, and they're still feeling some of the ramifications of that. And maybe they, didn't learn enough lessons from that in some level. I think it's when you still hear about things where customers get frustrated because they're not communicating well. One of the comments
Coca-Cola.
Yeah. Go ahead, Arnie.
No. I just wanted to underline that it was Coca-Cola back then in 2015, 16 that raised this problem. They are not talking our same language, therefore we are frustrated, therefore we don't want to waste so much money in something that we don't really capture the value we're getting.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. And I've heard that echoed from multiple people. And I've also heard some horror stories about that 2015-ish kind of time frame when Foundry was first released, and it wasn't the product it is today. But I think they learned some valuable lessons, and I think the product has really come a long way since then. Obviously, it's night and day compared to what it was then. Yeah. But there's an old saying: just don't poison the well. You don't want to. You don't go to market too fast if you're not ready. And so
yeah, I've often seen that, where software vendors will try to do everything in their power to please executives, but then they cross this line of ethics and morality that's not cool. I'll give you an example. There was this one vendor that came in and they were demoing a product with our organization, and there was some stuff around medical records that could have been a liability for my hospital. And so this organization said, "Oh, no, get rid of it. Don't show that to us." And the software vendor said, "Look, we don't operate that way. Whatever your data it's the data. We are not going to delete things for you. This is, we're not going to take the liability." So I remember at the time. They were like, we'll just end the contract with you. And guess what that software company did? They walked away. They said, look, our ethics are built more than whatever the hell you're trying to do. So we're not gonna do that, you know? And so eventually that executive was reprimanded and fired because the executives should not do that. Like most organizations, you want to have as much transparency as possible, not less. But the thing is, that executive was in charge of the project that was kind of related to what was supposed to happen. So it was almost weird because it was like almost like quid pro quo. Unfortunately, fortunately, technically for my organization, you know, they were honest about it. Like the software vendor, when they were ending things, they were like, this is the reason why this guy is trying to get rid of us. It's because he wants to make us do things that are unethical. Yep. So, you know, it's like the same thing. Like where if Palantir,
I've been in those exact situations, man. Yeah. Exact same. Yep.
If this executive, like, so basically what happened is the security person at JP Morgan said, oh, I want you to follow this person. I want you to do this. Like, so this is the story. And one of the things, with the help of more than 100 engineers from data mining company, Palantir, Peter Savich, blah, 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 collected emails, browser history, GPS locations from company phones, as well as transcripts from recorded phone conversations. You know, this is the kind of stuff that's like, wait a second, why would the engineers do this? Like, why would they go, okay, yeah, sure, that's fine, go ahead, keep doing that, especially senior executives at JP Morgan. That's when there should have been some controls in place saying, listen, our job is to help JP Morgan get better, but if anyone asks you to do anything unethical, tell them hell no, because no contract is worth it.
They've had some good track record too on that, though. You know, like they really were heavy into privacy and civil liberties too. So there are a lot of things they have said no to. I don't know what happened there. Maybe JP Morgan just was able to operate with a little bit more autonomy than they should have. I don't know. But like,
I think now this was really old story, by the way. So don't think that this is Palantir of today. Don't think this is the Palantir of today.
Almost
this
10
is
years now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So a lot of Palantir's evolution is probably from that. So right now, one of the biggest things is data privacy protection, because they understand that, guess what, in the past, when we were a little bit lax with it and some of the controls were not as good, it ended up biting us in the ass. So we better make sure that anything that we do now has that built into the system. You know?
Well, the counterbalance to this too is the lies that the companies tell themselves about all their wonderful digital transformation projects they're doing and how ROI positive they are, when we all know it's a bunch of bullshit. Like I could go back. I have stories from companies you all know about and use where all of that shit went down, you know, like full on executive over here, VP over here, basically lying to everyone about the profitability and the effectiveness of this project they did that cost millions upon millions upon millions of dollars. Where did all this money go? Like complete no accounting. We don't know. Big giant whatever, and they just fill in the numbers.
Or the mythical cost savings. That's the other thing.
No, that's what I'm talking about. That's the ROI. They're just making shit up. And like the engineers on the other side who worked on those projects all knew the truth and couldn't say shit. So like, there's a lot of this unethical behavior that goes on. Way. Like most of it occurs internally.
We had that too, where the company on the other side was like, oh, guess what? We helped you guys increase throughput with 2 patients a day. And because of 2 patients a day, and that's like $2,000, then multiply that by 365, you guys just saved $10 million. And this is only costing you a $20,000 a month like licensing fee. And I was like, bro, I don't think we ever did 2 additional patients. Like, y'all need to stop that. Like, you know, and so
that's a McKinsey ass presentation they just gave you.
And the reason why I wasn't involved with it is because like our senior leadership came to me and said, is this true? You guys are doing 2 additional patients a day? I said, no. Theoretically, we could, you know, but there's a lot of factors in there. These guys are just trying to like present themselves to being like this crazy like cost.
There's something I learned to be able to say in meetings like this. That is always a good thing to say. And when someone gets up and is making this point, and you should always add, if you trust the data, do I trust the fucking data? Probably not, because I can't see how you got there. That is one of the good things about Palantir, is that they've been really good about building systems that provide audit trails into the answers you get. But that you always got to learn that phrase. If you trust the data, because it happens all the time. like constantly. You know?
My thing is theoretical savings. That's always fun.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. No, yeah. You always got to see how people got to the answer, you know, and there needs to be a good audit trail in there to know, like, is it bullshit? Is it not bullshit?
Dude, you can massage data. That's the key. Massaging.
You can just invent it. You don't need to massage it. You can just make it up if you want to. So it's like, you know, it's at the end of the day, what are we looking at? We're like, all the fucking data ends up in Excel and all of that ends up in a PowerPoint, you know? So it's like, unless you know how that thing was produced, like,
a good executive will be like, where'd that data come from?
Exactly.
That's the key.
Another way to phrase that same question, you know, if you trust the data. And the only way you can trust it is to have like a nice audit trail to see exactly where it came from. So, anyway.
Guys, I have a question related to this. We know that Palantir is powerful, and the problem with being powerful is that some bad episodes like this one related to JP Morgan can happen. And we know that this affected their reputation. So there are some permanent damages related to it. Can we say the fact that maybe they were very, very cautious right now with pushing with marketing could be related to that? Because we know that Foundry has been developing a lot in these last years. And imagine if they started pushing on the marketing side years ago, where there were these kind of problems, and these problems emerged after they pushed the marketing aggressively. So can we say, or maybe we can speculate on the fact that now they are pushing on the metal on the marketing events and so on, is a sign that the management is finally confident in saying, okay, now we can go aggressive because we are confident that there are no many pitfalls.
Yeah,
it's either that or their sales go to market sucks.
No,
it's one
I think
or the other,
right.
right?
I think what happened is they went to market too early with a product, and they didn't know how to build product, and they didn't even have the technical infrastructure to figure out a way in which you reintroduce things that are made as part of a consulting agreement into a core, what we call core code base. I think that burned them, and then they probably delayed the mass market and delayed the marketing push until they felt that would never happen again, you know. And I think Arnie's right about that. Based on everything I know about
it makes
product
sense.
evolution, I think that's what prohibited the mass market from the get-go. Was the product largely came out of the government space,
right?
And there's, you know, in the government space, it's kind of interesting, but you can get away with a lot. What I mean by that is, like, in the commercial space, there's zero tolerance for bullshit or for bad code or for poorly architected solutions that aren't flexible. Like in a large, like, I mean, if you take Snowflake as the prototype built for Wall Street software company, it's ready out of the box. It's super flexible. It adapts to what you need. It's all documented. You don't need help. You just go. It's a very thin use case, like relative to what Foundry is trying to achieve, but really, really, really good example, you know, of what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely an interesting point. The idea that they're going to ramp up the marketing now that they finally think Foundry is ready for prime time.
I think so. I think that's what happened. And I think Arnie's right about that. So, yeah.
All right. Well, that's it. Good hour in. Thank you, Coach Rep, for breaking down ontology. This will be used many times to help people explain it.
If you have a few minutes, Coach, I wanted to
I got
highlight.
Time, man. I'm just chilling.
I want to highlight something that we didn't get a chance to cover last time, but we really should, and that's the Lockheed Martin deal, because that is the first time I'm hearing about Apollo finally being kind of like in the wild now, right? We've always heard Apollo, but now we're starting to see it come out. And there is actually, in my opinion, no better use case than working with a defense prime who literally is building every single sort of software integrated into hardware, where it needs to be deployed all over the world in areas that you could never phantom a commercial entity being in, right? Like on ships. Like, that's crazy use case. And if Apollo is that good, which it probably is, because Lockheed Martin, if you look at how much money they have and how many software engineers they have and how many contractors and subcontractors they work with, they could have built something, but they chose not to. The question is why? And that's the thing that excites me about Apollo, because that just means that whatever Palantir has, is something that a huge defense contractor is willing to take on instead of building themselves. So I always, whenever I look at any products, I'm always like, what is the cost of buying versus the cost of licensing? And does it make sense to buy? And then does it fit your business? And if it fits the business, that means that it's good. And it could actually be scalable.
I got two words for you: emerging markets.
Yeah.
And so the reason this is happening, in my opinion, what is the new bomber? The B-21, I think, is the new bomber.
Yeah, B-21 Raider. Yep.
If you look at a lot of the features that came out of there, it reads like a modern software stack, you know. And what's happening is in defense, there's a lot of container-based workloads that are entering the systems where traditionally it's been completely embedded systems everywhere. Apollo deploys container-based workloads. So like things you package in Docker, for example, things you distribute with Kubernetes. Docker is more the thing that is actually producing the virtualization layer, and then the Kubernetes is the orchestration piece for that. And so what's happening now is that that's actually going from traditionally where it's in the commercial space, finding its way into the military context for all these things they want to do with data. So all the things that want to do the data streaming and data analytics and like do all this stuff that's making them more operationally efficient, that's all being deployed as containers. It's not embedded systems anymore, right? And that's Apollo's jam. That's its wheelhouse, right? And so like as more and more of the defense sector starts to get into this, that TAM is going to explode because Apollo is the only game in town that lets you do that for closed networks and occasionally connected clients where the internet connectivity is intermittent. Like in that example we were talking about with Titan. Titan, the Titan command center can't, that Titan talk, it can't always be connected to the internet or to a network where it can get software updates. And Apollo is one of the only CI/CD systems that is completely built to support that. And it's fucking hard. It is not hard to do that. And I'm assuming it's what powers Meta Constellation, a lot of the deployments they do in space. Maybe not, but it sounds like it is. Because they have the same challenges of intermittent connectivity and low bandwidth, and updates could fail. So
it has to be resource efficient, right?
And so you have this need that's always been there in the military, which is the intermittent connectivity and the inability, the inability to have stable networks. I mean, Palantir at one point, like they employ a lot of former military. They were running around with fucking tough books in the middle of a war zone, trying to ship updates into Humvees, like all these other things like that. They were doing that way before, and now they have Apollo, and it's much easier for them to manage the updates on these things when they do connect. And
Blue
so
Force Tracker,
I mean, if you think about it, these Palantir has been doing military installations day zero on tough books, like physically in the field. Now they're taking that experience and applying it to an automated system that deals with intermittent connectivity, so they know all the ins and outs of what it's like on the battlefield to try and install a software update. And now as the military goes to adopt more of these container-based workloads to do things like data streaming, telemetry, and all these other things we've been doing in the private sector for a long time, that market's just going to grow. And so they could freaking annihilate, they will be the only game in town, like the only game in town. You are deploying software updates on container-based workloads, you're doing it with Apollo, like that's it.
Yeah.
And they could actually absolutely crush that. And that's why in that pod we did together, I was saying like, if they get a big share of the intermittent connectivity software deployment market, they dominate that, then they're going to dominate I think they're going to dominate a huge part of the software deployment market generally, because that problem is getting worse, not easier, even in the commercial space where the targets are now changing, where you need to deploy things to cell phones. And what I think is eventually coming is you're going to have like things like your phone, things like your laptop, and in your home, I think you're going to have like the equivalent of what is that? Amazon released the new Prime Cube thing. It's like the Fire Cube, which is like it's like almost like a higher end computing device to do data streaming and stuff. But eventually there'll be one of these for like your house that has all your machine learning models on it, and like all of your individual software that you use to do things like monitor your camera feeds and be able to like give you like your Alexa thing, all that kind of stuff. And I think that like that is actually going to introduce a world in which things like Apollo are going to be super valuable, where the deployment targets are like, now it's everyone's home. It's not just the data center, it's not just the phone, it's the laptops, it's the cube, it's all these things. And so that, again, emerging markets, that's why Apollo is going to get so big, and why they've said that TAM is bigger than Foundries, is because this problem is growing exponentially every day of how do I get a container-based workload on an intermittently connected device to this point guaranteed no matter what. And that's why I think it's going to be a hugely successful product. And they got Greg DeArmet there, who I've met a couple times, and the guy's
An OG.
He's an amazing dude. Like, and the whole
Yeah.
team, you know, their entire team that's running that product.
Seattle. That's where they're based out of, Seattle.
Yeah, totally. He's a total. Yeah, he's got the personality for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And Code, the big tech guys, something like Apollo, that's just not on their radar.
they're not even thinking about it. No one is, and that's like the classic big share of a small market conundrum, just like eBay back in the day and PayPal. You know, no one was looking at that, and no one's looking at it now. And the only people that are the ones that have the problem, like Tesla and Google and Apple. But they're not trying to commercialize that, nor are they going to want to. Yeah.
Do you think, guys, Apollo is the reason why Karp in the last interview said our time is north of $900 billion?
I don't know, man. I tried to figure that
That
out.
was an interesting quote, man. That was an interesting take.
I'm sure his lawyers were like, what did he say?
Yeah, because the S1 said 120 billion, and then government is 800 billion per year. That's where I think he got 800 plus 100. Is like,
oh, said it in German.
Billion.
He would have been safer, but I don't know why he said it in English.
Should have said 900 billion rupees. That's what should have said.
My God, dude.
Because it's like if the government spends 800 billion on defense, theoretically that is an 800 billion dollar TAM. They're not going to get all of that, obviously, but like if they even get 5% of that, but it was.
I went down that rabbit hole with someone on my Discord the other night, and I just was like, whatever. I have a feeling
maybe he hung out with Midwest Cannabis beforehand, and just 900 billion, 900 billion, totally.
You can totally do it.
Why not a trillion? Man, 900 seems way better.
That's exactly what it sounded like to me, man.
I wish he said 969 billion. If he had said some shit like that,
that would be good.
I checked. I think the entire SaaS market right now is at 200, 300 billion. So maybe in the future we will get there. But it's like, okay, now?
I don't know where he came up with that. I saw the global software market was like 650 billion. I'm like, that's the global software market. So like, how do you get 900 billion? I mean, I don't know.
Wait, but if we break down the government's U.S. government's defense budget, 800 billion.
Yep.
Aren't we already there? Palantir. I know they're not going to get all of that, but isn't that a TAM for Palantir?
No.
Like to get 800 billion.
If you know what's really depressing is if you go look at the U.S. government software spend right now, go look at that, and you're just like, what? That's depressing.
Yeah.
But it's also one of those things where governments will, as they modernize, they can actually achieve missions that are impossible. Like, so the talk that was given by who was it at Foundry Con, the woman who spoke for U.S. Space Command, I think it was Space Command, right?
Yeah, it was Space Command. Yeah.
Where she was saying like she basically has to go around and cobble together money from other people to get her shit done. Like just completely underfunded. There's no way to achieve the mission. Like a lot of those agencies, if they realize Palantir can help them achieve their mission at a fraction of the cost, they'll spend more money in being able to do that, because it's just like the only way they can achieve what they need in an underfunded mission to begin with. But the overall spend is in like the low billions on software in the government space. It's not a really big number.
Yeah. You look at the largest provider of software for the government is what is this, SAIC and Leidos, which are the two biggest ones right now, and they're nowhere near the 900 billion TAM that this guy is talking about. So
no,
I don't know, man.
It was a little bit of it was like an Elon Musk moment where he said Tesla will be bigger than Apple and Saudi Aramco combined. It was kind of one of those. Let me give the shareholders something to talk about.
Oh my goodness!
You remember like 2 weeks ago in the pod, I was like, yeah, this a couple of billion, and then it's like a couple of billion. Nah, you mean cojillion, bro? That's where we're headed.
I was like, come on, bro. I'm not in this for snowflake returns. I'm in this for Palantir returns.
God. Yeah.
That's what I'm here for.
I saw someone.
I have another question.
Yep.
And this is strictly directed to Chris. Chris,
go for it.
Do you realize that this case of Lockheed Martin using Apollo to empower ages is exactly the case, the confirmation why it is no sense actually to split the government and the commercial side? Because it is this integration that allows Palantir to get this kind of contract. If they were split, there would be no Apollo, there would be no this contract.
No, man, you could just cross-license the technology. I mean, that's the key here with me saying splitting Palantir is that you want to have a clear mission, right? And you want to have a clear sales strategy. Sometimes what happens is there's a little bit of cross-contamination in how the mission operates and how things happen. And also from an executive standpoint, I don't know how exactly they divide things up, but a lot of the decision making, if you try to look at it in just a single pane of glass, you're not going to be either good at selling to the defense side and you're not going to be good at selling to the commercial side. So I would think that it's a better idea to kind of split it off, not just from a PR perspective, but also from like a go-to-market perspective, where you want to, like for like commercial, you want to be light, you want to be nimble, you want to be scalable, right? For the government side, you want to be highly what is that thing called? Highly tailored to the government, because you're not trying to build 100 different use cases. You're trying to build a use case that's there. And you also have a bunch of non-technical users on the other side. Whereas the commercial side, you're don't have to do. So there's a lot of complexities in dealing with the government, and then a lot of complexities dealing with like commercial clients. And if you had two different companies, or at least two different holding, like Google, where you have a holding company with two different divisions, each having their own targets of growth, each having targets of revenue, you could end up doing really well on that, right? Where eventually that money could feed back into a central company, but having that differentiated model might end up helping you in terms of a business, right? Another thing is, like, think about it right now. Palantir can't hire H-1B visa holders because guess what? They work in classified networks. You can't hire government agents. So now that limits your talent pool. Well, what if they're segmented and only in the commercial side, which I'm sure that they have a program to do, right? But it's also like, how does their talent bleed into some of the government work? Does the government work bleed into the commercial side? Whereas if they were in two different holding companies, you wouldn't have to worry about that. Like now you could vastly hire a differentiated talent pool that can do stuff. So like I said, operationally, I would think that two different companies operating on two different levels, doing two different sales strategies with two different offerings, where they can cross-license technology that they can research, it might end up being the best of both worlds. You know,
well, two companies under the same wood basically would not change anything. I mean, operationally speaking,
what no, it does change a lot. It does change a lot because there's legal things that can change. You know, like Chris was pointing out, one with H-1B visa holders, but there's a lot of other things that change, not the least of which, the most important of which, is that you have a separate board that makes separate decisions, like about what they're going to do, right? Mm-hmm. And they have their own money to do it. And so that may seem like a small change, but it's actually like the person at the top of an org, like it's like Andy Jassy, right? Mm-hmm. Who runs the best model to think about this, like when we make these kind of IP sharing agreements, is kind of look at AWS, where Bezos ran Amazon as a whole, but Jassy ran AWS, and he had carte blanche to pretty much do what he wanted to do there. And he built a whole team that basically they went from sharing the bookstores infrastructure, like Amazon's e-commerce infrastructure, to now Amazon sharing their infrastructure. Right? So like AWS became this like monster. But that's a good example of where like intellectual IP, like the transcontinental cables that the cables they lay underneath the ocean were created by Amazon. You know, they designed those specifically for them. All of their chipsets, all of their switches, like AWS creates all of that. They have their own, like they work with Intel. They have their own chip design system that they send to Intel to have fabricated. Like all that was developed by them. AWS gets to benefit from all of that. But like that wasn't Amazon's bookstore commerce division benefits from all of that IP that AWS created. That had nothing to do with the bookstore's mission, the e-commerce division's mission. Zero.
Can you share the screen that I just put up?
But they benefited from all of it, So it's like, that's how two companies who are separate boards and separate funding, they can have IP sharing agreements, and that's how they benefit from each other. Yes. Corporate structures are really complicated, by the way. If you're not a lawyer, don't get into them. But yeah.
So if you look at this is the corporate structure for Amazon, right? So you have Andy Jassy, who's the CEO right now. He used to be in charge of AWS, right? Right now, Adam Selipinski is the CEO of AWS. But you can see here, all the people that are designed to deal with AWS stuff are here, and the people who are doing the e-commerce are on a completely like firewalled side on the other side.
Exactly.
So any of the decisions that are being made almost like you're a separate business, right?
Yep.
So you have growth targets, you have commercial targets, you have spending targets, you have accounting that's done separately. Yes, it all feeds into a senior executive, but by having a differentiated company, almost like two different holding companies, right? You can actually operate and see where your opportunities are. And each one can move a lot more nimbly than a giant battleship. So the way that I would say it is, instead of like one giant battleship that's going to go into a war zone, you need to have a frigate, you need to have a cruiser, you need to have a couple of submarines, you need to have an aircraft carrier, each one operating to the maximum of their ability, but at the same time operating like a group, moving in a certain direction. And if need be, each can maximize their targets, right? Their objectives. If you only had one ship that had the capability to, because that's what the Russians do. If you look at the Russians have one ship that does everything, but it does nothing good, right? Whereas the US, when we have our carrier group, every group has its own segmented task. That you have your submarines doing reconnaissance. You have your cruisers providing protection. You have your aircraft carriers providing that central CIC command and control structure for the battle group to operate. So those are the key things that I would say, like, that's why you have to differentiate a little bit. And that's where I think Palantir should do. But then again, that's just my take on it.
No, I agree with this, and I agree with the fact that it could be a good idea to have a specific focus. What I'm really against of is the idea of taking the commercial and taking out completely out of the equation, like saying, okay, you do the IPO, or just a complete separation from Palantir commercial and government, meaning that the two entities don't speak each other. You were saying having a new name completely detached. I think that actually would be a bad thing, because it would complicate a lot with ingestions where you have a commercial client. Lockheed Martin is a commercial client, but with a strict connection with the defense. Because
I think what you're having there, though, is like a knowledge gap, because what I was saying before, like corporate structures are fucking complicated. Like, you need to be a lawyer to know. Like, I don't know. But there are people out there who specialize in these kind of things, and we don't know anything about how those deals get to how any of that works. But there are structures to do what Chris is demonstrating here, which is like separate the executive teams, give them their own autonomy, give them their own leadership. And they're not separate stocks, right? We all trade Amazon under the same banner, but they have complete autonomy. And what you're struggling with is a knowledge gap of how corporate structures work, because we're not lawyers, right? So like, we're not lawyers who specialize in corporate structures and corporate law. So like, I think that's really where we're struggling. But I think we can point to an example like Chris did, which is like, look, there's a company out there that operates this way. They share intellectual property and they have complete autonomy between their divisions. And look at what it did for Amazon, because the bookstore was never going to develop chipsets. The bookstore was never going to develop the world's largest infrastructure company. It was never going to lay transatlantic cables. It was never going to design fiber optic cables. Like, it was never going to employ James Hamilton. That's for fucking sure. Like, James Hamilton, this is a distinguished engineer who works at AWS, who works on all this stuff, like kind of runs it all. Like, all of that benefited Amazon at the end of the day. But none of that would have come to fruition had they not divided those two concerns, because the bookstore, it's like a lot like that innovator's dilemma. It has its own set of metrics that it's optimizing for, and it would have never considered any of those investments. It would have been like, no way. And the organizational gravity would have pulled all that down, and they would have never innovated in those spaces. And AWS probably would have failed as a result. And so I think with government and commercial, you have a lot of those things that fight each other. I think you have different concerns. And if you look at, by the way, the fact that Foundry came out of that government space and it did so poorly when it entered the commercial space, should be confirmation that these things don't have the same incentive structures and that they don't work the same, right? And so I think that that's really the dividing line, is that the incentive structures are just very different between government and commercial. That doesn't mean the IP can't benefit each other. It most certainly can, but the business is different. And I think that's the big problem they're facing.
Well, the FDEs, guys, are interoperable between the two companies, from what you know? Or
no, they're not, because one, you got to have a security clearance in a lot of cases,
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to work in government, you can't just walk into a room, like you actually need a security clearance. And so those FDEs are 100% not interoperable. which is why they didn't scale their FDE employment until they got into commercial. It's hard to get it. It's hard to get a clearance.
Yeah,
I want one. So if anyone out there can help me get my clearance, let me know. I got former military, both my parents. Like, I'd love to get a clearance, but it's hard and it's expensive typically.
I want to end the pod on a lighthearted question for Mr. Codestrap. Do you know what the question is, Codestrap? Have any idea?
Hit me, man.
Any idea?
What is it?
You have no clue. Why did you join a company that Elon Musk just paid a lot of money to acquire? Already at 528 followers, you're like, you're here. Why'd you join? You said you were never gonna do it, and now you're here. Why are you on? By the way, everyone should go follow him. Let me just share it again. Yeah, what's your logic for being here?
Well, I'm glad I joined because, like, dude, that's where you guys all are hanging out. I didn't even realize how much stuff goes on every day. You know, like, it's crazy, like, how active you guys are. I'm actually like having a lot of fun on there, but I mean, to a degree. So I decided to join because I was like, you guys all saw the report that came out about the shadow banning, right? And
yes,
and
we did. We did.
Like, I knew they were full of shit. Like, Twitter was completely full of shit. They're anti-democratic. They're completely anti-free speech. Look, the prototype of people who think they're right is always the one that is, like, on the wrong side of history. It's like, whenever you have people engaged in black and white thinking who believe they're right and everyone else is wrong and everything else is a threat to them and a threat to whatever, go back and look at history and see what type of actions they took. Like, people who are intolerant of other viewpoints, people who are intolerant of other people, who dehumanize them, who engage in a lot of the things we see said about people today for whatever they believe. You know, I don't care what you believe, but like like you can see the behaviors repeating, and you can almost insert any ideology into that rubric where you get a group of people who believe they're right and they're justified in doing whatever they want because they're right. It doesn't matter what the ideology is. It's interchangeable. The human behavior is consistent. And I didn't want to be part of supporting an organization that was fascist in my view. Like, and fascist not in the real meaning of the word, what it means. It more the pop culture definition of it, which is like, we will squash dissent and we demand conformity. Like, and it really doesn't matter what the ideology is. It doesn't mean, even if you feel you're living up to a noble cause, the right way to achieve noble objectives is to not use those kind of tactics. And I never liked the organization because of that. I thought it was horrible, atrocious.
So Elon exposing a lot of this stuff kind of compelled you to. Yeah,
well, the fact he exposed it, like, really is what it was. It was like, this is a guy that's going to war with the worst actors in the country right now. Like, I think big tech, the people that think this way and think they're justified in their actions, are the real threat. I mean, the never forget, never again, all these things we learned in World War II, they were lessons about what human beings can do to other human beings. They weren't, it's not about the one human being like Hitler. It's about all of us. I always encourage people to go learn about the Stanford prison experiments, because if you think, there's even I think it's an MIT professor who asked his class, like, would you have been abolitionists if you were around at the time of slaves in America? And because at that time, the slave trade, it's still going on today, in case you don't know. Like, it was a worldwide phenomenon, a huge part of economics back then. And if you had risked being an abolitionist, you probably would have lost your property. You would have been excised from society. You would have been a complete outcast. You may have been killed.
One thing more for you, Coach, before you continue. I mean, look at what Mr. Beast tweeted the other day. If someone offered you 10,000, but if you take it, a random person on Earth dies, would you take the 10,000? 44% of 1.8 million people, so 833,000 people, said yeah, they would take 10,000. And it's
yes. No, you just have to put one more variable in there. If the person's a Trump supporter, right?
Right.
The whole poll changes.
Right.
No,
I said yes. I said yes. Ask me why.
But Chris, I feel like you said yes as a troll.
What I'm trying to get at, guys, what I'm trying to get at is that, like, even with abolitionists, people who believe they would have been on, quote, the right side of history, they don't realize that the number one thing that drives people is conformity, and that's why it's so dangerous to allow ideologies that demand conformity to foster, because they will snowball and they will turn into things you can't control. And that's what happened at Twitter. Jack Dorsey, I always wonder why he looks so depressed. Like, because if I had created that,
he wasn't.
I'd be depressed too.
No, but it's the
Yeah.
weirdest thing because this guy's the decentralized Bitcoin king, and he's
I
over here
know,
in Fort.
I
Like, it's the
know.
weirdest combination,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, he got out of there. He got out of there as fast as he could, I think, at the end of the day, you know. But that's the thing about human beings that you always have to remember is that you know, every monster in history believed they're right, and every human being on earth wants to be part of the group, and they will do immoral shit to do it. And you have to maintain, like, the great thing about Western philosophy and Western civilization is that supposedly we're dedicated to the idea that it's about the individual, it's about upholding the rights of the individual, and that no matter how many votes you have, no matter how much consensus there is, you're not supposed to be able to infringe on those inalienable rights, no
Right.
matter what, right? No matter how your feelings are, no matter how much hate speech, which isn't a thing, by the way, is out there. Hate speech is not a thing. It's an invented fucking term. There is a legal standard for speech that's been around forever. It's enshrined by the Supreme Court and the Constitution. That's the standard. And if you're an American, you're an American company, you're upholding anything other than the free speech standard, I start to wonder about, like, where that goes, especially if you have the capacity as a tech company to suppress any viewpoint you disagree with, and then to see it weaponized in the real world. So, like, Twitter became a weapon in the real world. I remember seeing during the summer of love and 2020 riots when people were using Twitter to target people, you know. I remember one video from my neighborhood where this girl was on Twitter and she says, because the guy's flying a Trump flag, puts up a Twitter video of him and says, Twitter, do your thing, and had his license plate on there, you know, zoomed in on his license plate. It's like they were not only suppressing it, but it was a platform that was actively used to dox and target people, and they did nothing, you know. And so, like, I absolutely hated it. And to see someone like Elon Musk come in and do more for freedom and free speech than anyone in Congress, than anyone else out there in big tech, as much as they want to talk about how much they love freedom and all this crap, to see him come in there and do that, I want to do everything I can to support him. One of the best things I can do to support him is go in there and use the thing, you know. So that's why I did it.
By the way, I put yes on the Mr. Beast question because I was on the damn L train and I was pretty sure someone was groping me the entire time. I was like, bro, yo, Thanos was right. The entire time. Every time I'm on the subway in New York, I'm like, bro, Thanos was right. He should have snapped that shit a couple of times, man. That's how I feel.
Oh my goodness.
No, totally.
Yeah.
No, you know, and by the way, I see people always like making false equivalences, like, or not false equivalences, but they always want to say, like, well, what about fucking January 6th? What about this? What about that? Like, dude, I'm against anyone or anything that goes out there and tries to target people and tries to tear down the principles enshrined in our founding documents. And then, like, if you are so far gone that you can't even go back and read, like, you know, Adam Smith, or you can't go back and like read Principles of Liberty, like John Locke and On Liberty, and understand what I'm talking about, like, pull your head out of your ass. Like, the idea that there's one orthodox view and it shall be enshrined and everyone else will be punished and persecuted until they get in line doesn't matter what the ideology is, you know. Like, I have never been a fan of Donald Trump in my entire fucking life. I'm not a fan, dude. I opposed him from day one because I felt the guy was just completely toxic. But like, the point is that we all need to understand that regardless of our views, if you create a system in which there are people who get to choose who gets to speak and who doesn't get to speak, the net result of that is going to be a system of conformity. And what that lends itself to is tyranny, because people, again, they want to be part of the group, right? And if what is amplified is intolerant and what is amplified is it's okay to do violence against the Nazis, people are going to rally around that, you know? It's going to become a thing. Again, go look at the Stanford prison experiments. And I'm against anything that uses technology as a weapon to do that. And that's exactly what happened at Twitter. Like, exactly.
You know what's really sad, right? I don't know if you guys saw this over this week, but Kristen Sinema, who's one of the senators from Arizona, she changed her party from Democrat to Independent. And let me tell you, some of the comments that I saw on Twitter were freaking egregious. She votes, like, if you look at her voting record, 93% of the time with Democrats, okay? Because she's very liberal. She originally started off a Democrat, but the Democratic Party's kind of moved almost away from a lot of the stuff. So she said, no, I'm going to do what's best for Arizona. So she's right now, she's an independent. Yep. And let me tell you, the things that people are saying about her, oh, you're a traitor, you're secretly a Republican, blah, blah. And that happens to Republicans too, that don't fall in line with the Trump thing. They're like, oh, you're a rhino. come on, guys. Like, dude, there are things when you elect a person, you elect them based on not what party they're part of. Dude, I don't like go like, okay, let me see. Am I going to elect a Republican today or a Democrat? No, I'm like, who's got the best ideas? Who's going to vote? I mean, who's going to fight for me? Right.
Yeah.
And people have really lost that. And it's kind of sad. That's the one part of the polarized like world that I don't like, where everyone votes on party lines for everything. And it's the stupidest thing. You know,
Yeah,
vote for what's good for your constituents. When did that change? You know, where
I think the number one thing people should always remember as Americans, like the number one thing. So I made a shirt recently. It says, "I'm not an intellectual. I'm an American." Yeah, and people don't know what that means, but it means that as an American, I feel entitled to speak on just about anything, because I grew up in a country where basically you're allowed to have an opinion, and it doesn't matter how educated you are, whatever. It's your right. It's your inalienable right to say whatever's on your damn mind, right? Born free American, right? Like that idea is like, I'm not going to kowtow or be crushed into a system of conformity that says, unless you have this credential, you can't speak.
Right.
And like, it's both a joke and it's funny because we often say stupid shit, but it's also cool because it's like, I wish more of the world had that mentality, you know? And so more people would speak up and who are afraid to on things maybe where they're not an expert, but actually have a moral informed opinion in which they don't voice it.
And as a result of more people speaking up, less people are conforming, because you have to try to develop your own opinion. Even if your opinion sucks, you give it a chance.
Exactly. Your default isn't the conformity, you know. Your default is there's more chance of a counterculture. There's more chance that people will not conform. And you need a certain amount of that to maintain a healthy society, you know. So and so like that's the thing that I love. And like people are so afraid of speech. Like, look, dude, I'm probably older than half the people that you interact with on a daily basis, but I grew up in a country where there was plenty of shitty speech out there before the internet. Okay, we had this thing called the National Enquirer. It was on every fucking grocery store chain, you know, like funniest shit ever. There was all kinds of misinformation. Misinformation isn't a thing. Okay, if you have an educated population, which the West is supposed to have, it doesn't matter how much bad information is out there. People are smart enough to find the truth. And I used to tell people, like, if you're getting your fucking news from Twitter, you're a moron. Like, why are you doing that? Okay. Like you need to go out and check reputable news sources just to verify that an event is actually real. Like if you're getting your news from information, you're dumb. And as a net result of that, the press has become dumb. You know, so like the fact that the distribution channels shifted over to Twitter, I think has a large part to do with the decline in the media, is because they have dumbed themselves down to the distribution channel and the audience. Now it's become a constant feed. And that's why they're so shitty, why there's no real reporting, why there's no actual due diligence and research. And they're just talking about each other's tweets and stories all day. So there's the only way to like kind of feed that perpetual news cycle, I think. But misinformation, like just so people know, like we should tolerate misinformation. Yes, motherfucker. That's what a free society is built upon, because anything other than that, you need a system and an institution to select what information gets picked and what doesn't. And unless you let the market decide freely, then that's going to turn into a tyrannical tyranny. And you saw it happen at Twitter, and you saw the government try and jump on it when they created their Ministry of Truth. And it's like, dude, it doesn't matter who's in charge of that. It could be a Republican, it could be a Democrat. It will be misused, and it will mostly be misused because people will want to conform to it, which will create this like feedback loop
and deploy it against their ideology.
Well, it doesn't even matter who's in control. Eventually someone gets in control of it and no one else ever does, you know? But like the problem is it's a feedback loop for other people, and will become self-sustaining at a certain point. You don't.
You know, it's weird. Yeah. I've started to see this, and I wrote a pretty lengthy Twitter thread about it, where I see something similar happening with YouTube, like finance YouTube in general, where instead of picking companies that are boring, dull, but actually are making money, people are going after the most sensational companies without doing any analytical thing. And it's like the next 10-bagger, you know, or the fucking thumbnails. I hate people who do the not Amit. Okay, Amit gets a pass.
I mean, shit, people went fucking bankrupt in the 1900s too, man. It does. You don't need Twitter to go be a fucking jackass and go bankrupt. You know, like, sorry, but like that's just the truth. And what's funny is like you get something like FTX where it's like completely sanctioned and quote legit, and it's total bullshit. So like, tell me, like consensus does not equal truth. Number one, it doesn't matter if everyone agrees. It can still be a pile of dog shit like FTX. And it's up to every individual to make decisions for themselves. And when did we get away from the idea that you're not responsible for yourself? Like, you're absolutely responsible for yourself. And so this idea we have to be afraid of information or Twitter or anything else is ridiculous, as long as we have a good education system, we have a good support system in our lives, people are there to help you and like realize when you're off the rails, then society will be healthy. If we focus all our energy into fixing Twitter and dealing with misinformation and not those other things like education and family and support networks and community, then we're
Coach
really
Trap, is there any argument that the algorithm, because a tweet could reach 1 billion people or something theoretically, hyperchart? Let's say you literally tweet out 2 + 2 is 5, right? Which is not true,
Yep.
and that is shown to millions of people that are impressionable because of whatever reason. Is there any argument for algorithms and the scale of technology today create the obligation?
No, not if they're run fairly, because there would be dissent. So if you have actual an open platform where people can dissent and that dissent is not suppressed, then no, because truth will win out. And whatever damage is done by people being idiots, like, look, we burnt half the fucking country down in 2020, you know, and like that did more damage than any fucking bad misinformation on COVID that ever went out, you know, more like, seriously, like, I'm not worried about what people do in response to bad information. I'm more worried about what mobs do and what people do in response to needing to conform to an order that throws truth out and replaces it with consensus. Could something happen theoretically where, like, you know, you cause a riot or you cause panic because someone says something that's not true? Sure. And that's been the case for a really long time. And granted, maybe you're not reaching 1 billion people. I don't know many people on Twitter that reach 1 billion people.
350 million people. But yeah, but very few actually have that much of a following.
Yeah. I mean, like, how many people would have, but they would be liable for the damage they do under current US law, you know?
Right.
So, like, again, that gets back to the free speech standard. The free speech standard has limitations. It's not open fucking, you can say whatever you want. There's slander laws. There's liability laws. There's all kinds of criminal laws that go along with speech. So, like, you could wind up in prison for that.
Yeah.
So I don't think Twitter has to reinvent what free speech means. We have had a long debate about this in this country over multiple generations with really smart, really informed people who have come up with a standard that we have. I don't want Silicon Valley replacing that, because one, they're fucking stupid, and two, they're not stupid. They're just intolerant assholes. And two, they don't have the authority. We didn't elect them to decide that for us.
So at some level, Section 230 has to be reformed then, because if Twitter's a private company,
I think the All In Pod did a great job today breaking down the reforms that should take place. Like, go watch it. They had great insights into the reforms that need to take place in light of what technology can do, and in light of what we know how these systems are being used to suppress speech. So it needs to be reformed. I don't think it's just Section 230 though. I think it's really about expanding the definition of open carrier laws as to why we would regulate these companies this way. There is this idea that Twitter is part of the town square today, but more importantly, I think it's about the laws we adopt for companies of a certain size that have like a certain reach. So it's like, when do open carrier laws apply to a tech company? And I think the size of the company kind of it has to be considered, because I don't think you could make those same decisions for a startup. Like, Amit, I don't want to put you under the same regulations as Twitter, you know. I don't think you would want to fall under that. And if we're not smart, then we're going to create a situation in which we kind of outlaw competition through regulation. And so we have to really be smart about this. Like, when we're going and trying to, even things like GDPR and things like privacy laws, like, if you don't consider the scale of the business, what you'll do is stifle innovation. And companies like yours will never get off the ground, you know? So, like, we have to be very smart about, not in this digital age, not only recognizing that there are new things we need to regulate, but how we regulate them. Because if we enshrine Apple and Facebook and Twitter into the next generation, for the next 100 years, simply because no one else can do the legal compliance to compete, no one's going to benefit from that, you know? So we have to be very smart about what we ask for.
Arnie, you had a question. What was it?
Yes, I was willing to see the same topic, but from a slightly different angle. Is misinformation, this kind of superficial content that is produced on YouTube just to follow the algo, just a human need exacerbated right now by the crazy amount of dopamine that we need.
Yeah, dude, I hate.
Yeah,
the
it's
fact
human
that-
nature.
Yeah,
but
you're not gonna fight that.
it's kind of toxic though now, right? Because I mean, like sometimes I look at TikTok just for fun, and I realize that the biggest channels and the biggest views are the people who eat. Well, some actually are really good. Like Mr. Beast is really good, but then there are some people that just need this constant crave for attention, that they're doing things that are crazier and crazier. And it's literally every time that, their stuff gets boring, they do something something that'll one up that. And literally it's getting to the point where it's like, where's society going with this? Like, are we just a bunch of attention whores?
I think we are. I mean, but I think that's been like I think you gotta go.
No, go ahead, man.
I was gonna say I was looking a little bit at the Harry and Meghan documentary on Netflix this weekend, and they were talking a little bit about the British media. And I'm not from Great Britain, so I didn't even know how obsessed the media is with the royal family and how much they just like constantly cover them. But they get a lot of money for covering the royal family. I mean, at the end of the day, YouTubers get a lot. I mean, TMZ.
They're the Kardashians, dude. They're the Kardashians of the UK.
Yeah, and why do the Kardashians get covered? Because we as humans are interested in it. So it's like the argument you're making about attention whores and dopamine. It's like, as Coatsrap was saying, it's this collective conformity problem, which Kim Kardashian is interested. Why does she have 300 million followers? Why does she have a cult? It's like because we want to conform to be part of her tribe for whatever reason that we think is exciting. And as a result, if she says to go do something like buy her product, we'll do it. And that exacerbates the attention media that we're in. And I don't think that's changing, especially in the age of technology.
Yeah,
I think the only thing that makes it better
too.
Yeah. The only thing that makes it better is a free.
Science.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. What you're talking about, that conformity thing, that's been studied a lot in social sciences. Jonathan Haidt's done a lot of research on it. If you haven't read The Righteous Mind, that's a great book to go read. It's The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Can Disagree on Politics and Religion. And it dives into a lot of this. And he talks a lot about how the human mind is both individualistic and hivish. And to a lot of degrees, there are two grand narratives, which we all kind of gravitate to. One is more collectivist narrative about fairness. The other is a more individual narrative about tyranny. Yes. And people on some degree are hardwired to kind of gravitate to those grand narratives, but it's deeply ingrained in our DNA to want to be part of things and at the same time be individuals. And there's when you talk about this driving need for conformity, why I'm so scared of it is because yes, you're absolutely right. People want to be part of that tribe, and it's you can observe it in young children. You can see it, in the way they play games. And then that manifests up into adulthood, into things like following Kim Kardashian, but also being like, the wave of intolerance that gets out of control, where you get like something like the French Revolution. And we need people go back and read history. It's never a good thing when you get these kind of snowball effects that get out of control. It will lead to violence eventually. Like there's literally never been a time when that hasn't led to violence. And that's why I'm so scared of it. It doesn't. And again, I don't care about the ideology. What I care about are people who believe they are right and demand conformity in all X or Y. All these people who aren't us, they're bad, right? So like that's a situation and never ends well. And that's why I was very, very skeptical of Twitter. But again, want to support.
And that's why you joined Twitter.
That's why I joined. I want to support the man.
That's it.
Yeah.
All right. That was a good way to end it. Got a lot of good
man.
stuff in there. Thank you so much, Coatsrap, for joining us. Thank you all, 130 people, for being here. I think we got some good stuff on ontology, free speech, and what's Palantir's moat at the end of the day. Hopefully Chris will be convinced after he does more. I've done another 42 of these pods to eventually
42. You've done
Palantir.
42?
Yep.
Yeah.
Maybe then Chris will be convinced
cool,
that
man.
Palantir
No,
actually...
Look, my thing is, does it make good sense on paper? Yes, of course it does. The technology is good, blah, blah. But it's execution, right? Does a business
but that's the risk. That's the risk.
Well, there's a lot of companies right now that are doing really well on the execution side. So why should I not put my money on them? Why should I risk it on someone who's not
they don't
executing?
have ontology.
When Palantir starts to execute, I will be the first one to throw all my money into them. But right now, they're not executing like they should. And so they don't deserve that additional valuation that that
Fair.
basically confidence. Right at the end of the day, the stock market is a voting machine. Right now, my votes are not going towards to Palantir as much. No, someone said, "Did you, Chris sell again?" No, I don't. I have some Palantir. My wife is
He
buying.
has like this much Palantir.
My
wife
wife is DCA.
when he told me the amount he had, I was like, "Get the fuck out of my face, Chris." Like,
yeah, my wife is DCAing. Okay,
He bought a share.
Palantard.
He's but DCAing a share at a time.
he bought a one
Yeah.
share.
I didn't buy one share. Okay, it's not a lot. But
You want to tell them how much you have? Because you might as
Let's
well.
not. No. I believe it or not, I even have some call options on Palantir. Okay, so I'm not completely out of Palantir. So don't think that. Like there is a chance that they hit a growth curve. They hit that S curve. Maybe Apollo does it, where a lot of people start like literally one of the things that I thought was super bullish on their last earnings was the growth in the smaller segments, the companies that are under $1 million. I hated Palantir when they said, "Oh, we only target big companies because big companies are where the money." No, shut up. Stop that shit. Go after everyone. Like take every single bite that you can get because that's how you scale. You get into as much of the industry as possible and then build your way up. If the smaller guys use it and it becomes more efficient, they become medium-sized companies. And if they're going to do well, medium companies become large companies. Stop with this nonsense with we only go after big companies. That was so like stupid in my opinion. But whatever, But yes, Palantir is a very small portion of my portfolio. Believe it or not, most of my portfolio is in cash right now. The market's not exactly in the healthiest of shapes.
No, you're right. I mean, that's not a bad decision.
I'm still fully invested now, and I continue to buy into the market. I don't want to get into my specific investments. I'm holding a ton of Palantir, but
Coach Sharp,
yeah,
Alpha
I'm
Spread
just
is awesome.
buying.
I saw Alpha Spread. I got it. It's awesome. I love that thing.
Nice, nice. I've been avoiding individual stocks and stuff too.
Yeah.
Is Alpha Spread like a stock picker thing?
No, it's the thing that you posted on Discord, remember? And then like the thing that lets you see the valuation of companies.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, that's amazing. Yeah, and like to be able to see like how overvalued they are, like with best case, worst case, base case, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it runs DCF models for you, so this way you can see.
I used it to build a few models on certain companies I'm interested in, and so and that Google, I'm definitely really, really looking at Google. People might panic with GPT and chat and everything, and maybe get a little short-sighted. Maybe there's a sell-off as a result of that, but I'm definitely looking at Google a lot.
For me, it's Meta, baby. Bring it on. I trust Zuck.
I heard rumors that Zuck might step down as CEO.
Yeah, I heard that rumor.
Yeah, I heard those too.
So.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
If he does, the thesis is done because I don't know who can transform Meta.
That's what I said. I said, man, if he leaves, the metaverse is dead. All that $5 billion a year he's spending is going to go away, and the company's going to take years to recover if it ever does. So
and Sandberg's
he ain't going anywhere. If he retires, is going to be like what's that dude, Bob Iger, who just came back from Disney? It'd be like Bob Iger. Yeah, exactly. It'd be like a 2-year hiatus. Let someone else fail, rebuild. But
Zuck's still really young. Zuck's young.
He's like 37.
He's
like 37.
Yeah, I mean, that guy's so young, dude.
Yeah,
but they need him, man. Like if he's gone, good luck.
I was hoping to see Sandberg becoming the CEO, but no way she left.
I heard not so many good things about Sandberg, to be honest with you guys. Like I thought like, oh my God, she's this operator. She's really good SEO, blah, 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 all the good stuff. But I spoke to some internal people at Facebook and they were like, bro, they literally told me like, you don't know shit. And I said, what do you mean? She's like, if you think Sandberg is the reason why we're successful, you're completely wrong. I was like, okay. Shit, what have you heard? They didn't go into too much details, but maybe Coach Trap, you could probably elaborate. What have you heard?
I just heard that Zuck was thinking about stepping down, and the feedback I was giving people, the person who brought this up, was that would just be the death of everything he tried to build there. It'd be like all the moves he was making, if they are as important, people fucking hated Steve Jobs at a certain point too. Like he left Apple, he came back, it was successful. The guy was the visionary. I think sometimes it gets hard to fight battles just over and over and over and over again too. Yeah. So like at a certain point, maybe it is good to step aside or regroup a little bit. But at the same time, like I think if he left, like that company would just get destroyed. I don't think the market would react well. And I also don't think like the project, the things he spent all this money investing in would ever see the light of day, even if he did come back. So it's like
basically you can allow a company like that to have the CEO, which is the founder, stepping down only when the company can go more or less with the autopilot. Like when Tim Cook entered, Apple was already set. It just needed to become more efficient and to become the cash flow cow it is right now. But
correct.
Apple itself was already working. It's not like, Tesla right now is getting there. If Musk stepped down, Tesla would survive, wouldn't be as good in the initial phases, but would survive. Meta right now is in a too critical moment where it needs to do the things right while having the pressure both on the metaverse, because to the eyes of almost everyone right now, that is dead money. And on the Instagram side, they're doing well, but are they doing well enough to actually survive against TikTok? Because there are many positive hints, but then what was perceived as the untouchable network, we are starting seeing that the network is not that strong as we were used to think.
Yeah, I think we're definitely going to talk about this tomorrow on our Finance Junkies thing on Sunday. But I think a lot of people are, whenever any new technology comes, especially, like, what was the best example that I heard? It was when Google transitioned to mobile, right? When they were going with Android. A lot of people internally at Google were like, oh, this is stupid. Why are we doing this? This is not going to work, right? And so they didn't have the foresight and the vision to see that this could actually become something. So you're always going to have that struggle. Now, what if Google had said, you know what, Android, let's just shelf it, not a project worth investing in, they would have missed out on a whole new revenue thing. So even right now, you have to be willing to fail. If you're an innovative company, you're willing to put your money behind things that fail. The question is it something that's going to drag your entire company down? And if at what point do you pivot away? Like look at Amazon. Amazon pivoted away from the Fire phone. They came out with it, didn't work. Boom. They said, fuck it, not worth it. But that's the thing. If you're an innovative company, you can't be afraid to fail. And so that's what Meta is doing right now, which I think they're doing very well. They have 90% market share in VR. 90%. It's fucking crazy. They're doing $1.5 billion in revenue on Metaverse, on the Oculus thing. Though Horizon Worlds, that sucks like crazy, dude. But everything else, I think Meta's doing well.
Yeah, I'm betting you he wishes Palmer Luckey was still there. So.
Yes.
That's just to drive it back to my point about the bad things that happen when you demand conformity and you don't listen to reason and you don't allow dissent.
You
lose people like Palmer Luckey.
But Coach Rep, that was interesting because Zucks has been influenced by Peter Thiel his entire life. I mean, Zucks was a guy who said Holocaust denial is allowed on Facebook.
I think I heard you bring this up the other day. Didn't you do a podcast where we were kind of talking about this?
Yeah, probably. I mean, he took a lot of flack for saying Holocaust denial is okay on the platform. Obviously, it's not okay. But like he said, hey, freedom is like, I think Peter Thiel's ideology since 2005 has been embedded with him. So it was weird that the Palmer Luckey thing happened because you would think Zucks would be tolerant enough.
But I mean, like I started to get really shocked when I saw some of the people that were being marched out the door at a lot of these tech companies are just indispensable to the initiatives they're doing. And they were doing it to kowtow to pressure, that was largely reactionary. So like, it's inflammatory. It's like, oh, this thing happened and everyone's mad. But it's like a fire that's going to go out in like maybe a week or 2 weeks or a month or maybe a year. Right. But like, it's a temporary thing. It's like this reaction that's going to be there for a little while while people are angry. And then eventually maybe they calm down and cooler heads prevail. But then if you exit someone like Palmer Luckey, like there isn't another Palmer Luckey people aren't widgets, dude. Like the Pareto principle is real, And if you start making decisions to exit people like that, and then like, well, what do you do with these projects? And maybe a large part of the reason they're in the situation they're in is because Palmer Luckey isn't there anymore,
And so even Thiel stepped down from the board.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. That's right. That kind of got me scared because I was like, is he actually going to just focus on other things and he's going to like step down from Palantir and all this other stuff? But that did get me a little worried.
What would worry me about Meta? If Carmack left the VR side. Carmack is one of the people that's still kind of holding everything together. He's one of the people that's actually like, listen to your consumers, listen to what people are saying, because you need that. who said it? Someone said in your organization you always need to pay attention to your clients, right? And a lot of times you end up getting tunnel vision and you don't listen to anyone, and then you eventually just create a monstrosity. You burn all your cash, and you get the Homer car. Have you guys ever seen the Homer car before?
I love the Homer car. That was like one of the best. This is so epic. The Simpsons. That episode's incredible, dude. His long lost brother. He finds his like long lost brother. He's like a really successful dude that runs like a car.
Did you ever watch The Simpsons?
I watched it. I didn't see this episode, but I did watch this.
Oh, so classic.
Dude, the Homer car is. Yeah, I love that episode, man. Yeah,
unfortunately, the Oculus is like it is the Homer. It's like what the fuck, or not the Oculus, but the Facebook Metaverse experience. Like, did you guys see the videos of people just trashing it?
Yeah. I've seen some dope videos too, dude. But it's a bet. I just think the ads business. They have 10 million advertisers. I don't know. I don't think that ads business is stop. And WhatsApp is going to get monetized now, but the metaverse is that little thing in the corner that Zucks has that visionary founder ethos for.
I have a prediction for you. My prediction is if Elon finds a way to make subscriptions work at Twitter, like the whole ad support model is dead. Like it's not coming back. And I think
on Twitter or on big tech?
On Twitter. And actually, this is because it's not just like I work in this industry and like we work on these models all the time. And a lot of the VCs that we talk to, like the ad model's done. Your valuation is dog shit if you're based on that. You better be based on high value subscription model and have high quality revenue. And if you're not, we're not really interested. You know what your multiple is going to be? 2, right? 3, maybe. If you want the 50x, you better have high quality subscription revenue. If Elon can show it working for a major tech company that people are willing to do whatever they call microtransactions or whatever, however he can figure out how to monetize that thing if it actually delivers value. I kind of think that whole ad support model is going to die, and they're going to need to pivot really quickly.
I just think it's going to be hard to get a significant part of the user base because, bro, on Twitter, I know you just got their Coach Rap, but like less than 2% of people actually tweet enough to keep the platform entertaining. It's hard. I don't think a lot of people are going to find value in paying $8 a month because they don't give a fuck. But
it depends. I think it's like how you scale that content creator model. So like the sort of influencer model, if you can scale that to the right size, it can
work.
Huge. Yeah. And what's funny is because that trend of the influencers getting bigger and bigger and bigger, that trend has been accelerating for the last 5 years. And so maybe it is like almost everyone's an influencer at some point, Right. But it's a lot of it has to do with how you create the communities. So you found it.
Yeah.
Okay, Homer, pick out anyone.
Wait a second. This from FX?
You want to give me a car?
No, you got to see when he does his presentation.
There's maybe $40 worth of steel in them. Oh.
He does a presentation at the end.
Yeah, I'd like a big one then.
We don't have a big one.
Why not?
So
because America don't want big cars.
Yeah.
Well, then
You have to see the presentation at the end where he designs his own.
No, I'm gonna put it up there. Hold on.
Yeah.
I was gonna say we're definitely gonna get demonetized if we fucking.
What kind of car would you like, Mr. Simpson?
I don't know.
Here's what you do. From now on, before you say anything, say to yourself, if I was ever sure of anything, I'm sure of this. Do you understand?
Sort of.
Homer,
What?
answer me again with self-confidence. Sort of.
Now I want to go watch The Simpsons.
So this is how most executives are at my job. That's why I love this.
I said a place to put my drink. You know those super slackers.
This is from about like 94, 95.
This is so old, yeah, for sure. Were you even born yet, Amit?
I was born 97.
That little ball you put on the aerial so you can find your car in the parking lot. That
I
should
was
be on every
3 years
car.
old.
And some things are so snazzy they never go out of style, like tail fins and bubble domes and shag carpeting.
Do you have Disney Plus, Coach Rap?
I do. I do.
That Simpsons is all on that.
You're gonna hang up.
We have watched like every episode of The Simpsons. I'm gonna watch Andor. I heard Andor is pretty good.
Bart, Lisa, come over here.
What is it, Unky Herb?
You're fired.
Okay, that's it.
We didn't get to the car. We didn't get to
this part.
Oh,
This one part.
Chris, get us to the right part then.
You gotta get us there. Come on, man.
All right.
Rum, rum, rum.
Ladies and gentlemen,
This is like the Tesla Cybertruck.
the average man, the Homer.
It's not a bad car. It looks pretty cool.
It's the Oculus. The Oculus 10,000.
Any questions? What does this monstrosity cost, Jerry?
Oh, that's where you got the word Chris. Chris thought he was smart.
$82,000. This monstrosity
$25 billion.
What have I done?
That's gonna be Zuck.
Yeah. This is literally the whole thing with Horizon Worlds when he did the whole thing. I was like, oh god.
I think probably YouTubers
Too funny.
trashing the metaverse are making more money than Zook with the metaverse
Oh
right now.
my god. If he pulls it off, though, if he gets us to stay in a headset for 2 hours a day, which I don't think is going to happen, but if he does,
Have you
gonna be
guys even
rich.
tried VR? Have you tried it?
Nope.
I haven't tried it.
You haven't tried it?
No.
no, it's not
y'all-
even interesting for me to want to think of trying it. Like, it's
Same.
not
Alright,
even
well-
exciting as of
well,
now.
Well, try it. That's all I'm gonna say. Try it. You know.
Okay.
All right,
That's
guys.
Good
It was a
2-hour pod.
pleasure.
Thank you, everybody, for
Epic
being
pod.
here.
Yeah.
Epic.
See you next
Thank you
week.
guys so much.
Later.
Talk to you.
Bye, guys.
Back to sleep. Ciao, ciao.